Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Harryverse X, presenting to you today, what if Nico Di Angelo and Thalia Grace saved Harry from cupboard and Hades made him god of shadows and lightning. Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Cupboard and the Dark. The crow landed on the garden wall at number 4, Privet Drive at exactly 11:30 on a Tuesday night, and it did not move for a long time. Nico Di Angelo sat beside it on the wall, hands in the pockets of his aviator jacket, black jeans dusty from 3 shadow jumps across the Atlantic. He was 13 years old and he had the eyes of someone considerably older, dark, flat, and patient in the way that only children of Hades ever managed to be patient, which was to say, with the absolute certainty that everything ended eventually and he was in no hurry. He was watching the house. It was aggressively ordinary. That was the first thing that bothered him. Every house on this street looked like it had been designed by someone who was deeply afraid of being interesting: identical lawns, identical curtains, identical little cars sleeping in identical little driveways. Number 4 had a garden gnome that someone had painted with a cheerful red hat, and that gnome was, Nico had decided, the most sinister object on the entire block. "You've been staring at it for 10 minutes, Thalia said, dropping down from the oak tree on the other side of the wall with considerably more noise than Nico would have liked. She landed in a crouch on the pavement, electric blue eyes scanning the street out of habit, then straightened and came to lean against the wall beside him. Her dark hair was spiked, her jacket covered in band pins that caught the orange glow of the street lamps, and there was a hunting knife on her hip that she hadn't bothered to hide because this was 11:30 in Surrey and no one was awake. "I'm thinking," Nico said. "You're brooding. There's a difference. I'm thinking and brooding. It's efficient." Thalia snorted and turned to look at the house. The crow hopped sideways along the wall, ruffled its feathers, and went still again. Neither of them shooed it away. The assignment had come through the usual channels, which, in the case of children of the Big Three, meant a dream that was more instruction than vision, and a sense upon waking that the world had quietly rearranged its expectations of you. Hades had shown Nico a street, a house, a number. He'd shown him a signature in the spiritual fabric of the world, a kind of power that didn't belong to any known taxonomy, neither monster nor demigod nor mortal, radiating from one specific point inside that ordinary house like a bruise that glowed. Zeus had apparently shown Thalia something similar, though she was vague on the details in the way she always was when Zeus was involved, which told Nico she wasn't vague at all but had decided not to share yet. That was fine. He understood the calculus of information. "You feel it?" Thalia asked. "Yeah," Nico said. He'd felt it from 2 blocks out, a low, dark hum in the ground, like a tuning fork struck against the bones of the earth. Shadow energy, but not the kind he produced. The kind he produced was trained, intentional, shaped by years of practice and the specific inheritance of Hades's bloodline. This was wild. Formless. Like lightning trapped in a bottle that was 3 sizes too small. "It's in the house," Thalia said. "It's under the house," Nico said, and Thalia went quiet. They'd both had the same briefing, technically. But Nico was a child of Hades, and things underground spoke to him in a register that other demigods missed. The energy wasn't coming from the ground floor of number 4. It was coming from a point approximately 6 feet below the front door, a basement, maybe, or a cellar, and it was pulsing with the irregular rhythm of something living. Something alive and afraid, specifically. That was when Nico stopped brooding and started paying very close attention. "I'm going in," he said. "Obviously," Thalia said, already moving. "I was going in 20 minutes ago. I was waiting for you to finish thinking. You said brooding. I was being generous." Nico stepped off the wall onto the pavement without making a sound and the crow lifted from the wall and vanished into the dark above the rooftops. He walked to the front gate, a little wooden thing with a latch, and paused, and held very still, and let his senses spread out through the earth the way his father had taught him. He found the wards immediately. They were layered, old, and built by someone who understood magical security with an almost bureaucratic thoroughness. The outer ward was a notice-me-not, blurring the house from casual attention. The middle ward was a family binding, keyed to blood, specific blood, old blood, with a sacrifice woven into the foundation of it that made Nico's jaw tighten. And underneath both of those, barely perceptible, was something else. Something that hadn't been placed by the same hands as the others. Something that felt less like a ward and more like a cage. It was keyed to keep something in. He turned to Thalia. "There are wards. I can see them," she said. She was holding out one hand, fingers spread, the way she did when she was reading the electrical field around something. A faint blue-white flicker played along her knuckles. 3 layers. Someone built this carefully. "The third one's a containment ward," Nico said. Pointed inward. Thalia lowered her hand and looked at him, and for a moment neither of them said anything because the implication was sitting right there between them, plain and ugly, and saying it aloud would make it real. "Right," Thalia said, and her voice had shifted. The sardonic edge was still there, but under it was something hard and cold, the thing that happened to children of Zeus when their patience ran out. "So we're breaking in." "We're breaking in," Nico agreed. The notice-me-not ward was the easiest. Nico simply stepped through it the way he stepped through shadows, not fighting it, just refusing to participate in its logic. Thalia walked beside him and the ward flinched at the electrical field she naturally generated, confused by something that was simultaneously not human and not magical in any category it recognized. Together they crossed the lawn in silence. The front door was locked with both a Muggle deadbolt and a magical seal. Thalia looked at the magical seal, pressed 2 fingers against it, and sent a single precise pulse of electricity into the enchantment structure. Not enough to destroy it, enough to tell it that the voltage currently standing on this doorstep was not something it was rated to handle. The seal dissolved with a sound like a quiet cough. Nico had the deadbolt open in 4 seconds with a sliver of shadow that was excellent at convincing tumblers to cooperate. They went inside. The house was dark and smelled like synthetic pine cleaner and something cabbagey that had been recently boiled. Nico closed the door behind them without a sound. A hallway stretched ahead, stairs on the right, a kitchen at the back, a sitting room door to the left with a sliver of television light bleeding under it and the sound of someone snoring. The pulsing was louder inside. Low and dark and wild, coming from directly beneath his feet, from somewhere, there. Under the stairs. There was a door. It was a small door, flush with the paneling, and you would miss it if you weren't looking. It had 2 deadbolts on the outside, 2 bolts on the outside, Nico registered, which meant it was meant to keep someone inside, and a cat flap at the bottom that had been screwed mostly shut with 1 screw left loose, leaving a gap approximately 2 inches high. Nico stood in front of the door and the pulse hit him like standing too close to a subwoofer, buzzing in his teeth, in the hollow of his chest. Up close it didn't just feel like shadow energy anymore. It felt like, he reached for a comparison and found one that surprised him, it felt like standing at the gate of the underworld when the veil was thin. Like something with 1 foot in multiple worlds simultaneously, radiating from a single point, a single small body. He looked down. Through the 2-inch gap in the cat flap he could see a thin sliver of darkness and, just barely, the edge of what might have been a threadbare blanket. Nico looked at Thalia. Thalia looked at Nico. "Open it," she said, and her voice was very quiet. He took the bolts off in 2 seconds and opened the door. It was a cupboard. A storage cupboard under the stairs, with a sloped ceiling that followed the angle of the staircase above. There was a broken bicycle in one corner, several cardboard boxes, a mop and bucket, and in the space left between all of these things, barely the size of a large dog kennel, was a cot. On the cot, wrapped in a blanket that had been washed so many times it had faded from whatever color it used to be to a uniform exhausted gray, was a child. He was small. Even for a 7-year-old, which Nico estimated him to be, he was small, narrow shoulders, knobby knees pulled toward his chest, black hair going in 12 directions at once. His glasses were held together at the bridge with a piece of tape. He was awake. He'd been awake before they opened the door, Nico realized, the boy was looking at them with eyes the color of a forest in late October, dark green and very still, and he was not screaming, and he was not cowering, and he was not even particularly surprised. He was looking at them the way someone looks at a thing they've been half expecting for a long time without ever letting themselves believe it would actually happen. There was a bruise along his jaw, old and yellowing at the edges. There were older marks on the backs of his hands. The shelf above the cot held a broken crayon, a chipped mug with no handle, and a small spider in a crack in the wood that the boy had apparently been watching before the door opened, because his gaze went back to it briefly before returning to them. "Hello," the boy said. His voice was quiet and careful, the voice of someone who had learned that being too loud had costs. "Are you real?" Nico had faced monsters that could swallow buildings. He had walked through Tartarus. He had held his sister's hand as she crossed the barrier between living and dead and understood in that moment what loss was at its most structural, most fundamental level. He had not, in the roughly 6 years since then, felt anything rearrange itself inside his chest the way those 3 words did. He kept his face neutral because that was what he did. "Yeah," he said. "We're real." The boy, Harry, Nico knew from the briefing, Harry Potter, 7 years old, one surviving parent deceased and one not applicable, considered this for a moment. He looked at Thalia, who had crouched down so she wasn't silhouetted against the hallway light, and then back at Nico, and then at the open door behind them with something in his eyes that was desperate and carefully controlled. "Are you here to take me somewhere?" Harry asked. "Yes," Thalia said. "Okay," Harry said, and he sat up and pulled his blanket around his shoulders and looked at them with total seriousness. "I need my shoes. They're under the cot. And there's a loose board behind the bicycle, there's a tin box under it. It has some money in it and a photograph. Can I bring those?" Nico blinked. He had expected tears, or terror, or at minimum a few more questions. He had not expected a 7-year-old to immediately begin organizing his exit. "Yeah," he said. "Grab everything." Harry moved with the efficiency of someone who'd thought about leaving many times, which he clearly had. The shoes came from under the cot, trainers, one lace replaced with a piece of string. The tin box came from behind the bicycle, a biscuit tin with a bent lid that he tucked under his arm without opening it. He stood up to his full height, which was not much, in the sloped ceiling of the cupboard, and was also not much compared to Nico, and was almost comically not much compared to Thalia, and he looked at the two of them and he said, "Right then." "Right then," Thalia agreed, standing. Getting out was more delicate than getting in because Harry couldn't pass through the wards the way they had. The containment ward specifically was key to him. Nico could feel it now, could feel the way it registered Harry's presence and stretched, prepared to tighten. He crouched down and examined the architecture of it carefully. It was old work, cleverly done, with a kind of self-repairing quality that made brute force dismantling a bad idea. "Can you step back for a second?" he said to Harry. Harry stepped back. Nico pressed his hand to the floor, palm flat, and pulled on the shadow energy. Not the contained, wild kind that was Harry's, his own, shaped and controlled and carrying the quiet authority of Hades's bloodline. He pushed it into the ward's foundation and found the keystone logic, the central assumption on which the whole structure rested, which was that Harry belonged to the people in this house by blood compact. He found that assumption and he simply disagreed with it, in the language of death and shadows, which was not a language that wards written by the living were well equipped to argue with. The containment ward came apart like wet paper. Harry made a small sound. When Nico looked up, the boy was staring at his hands, where for just a moment, just a flicker, the darkness from the cupboard had gathered around his fingers like it was saying goodbye. "Did you feel that?" Nico asked him. Harry looked up. "It's always done that," he said. "The dark. I thought it was just me being strange." "It is just you being strange," Nico said, standing. "But strange is fine." They went through the front door into the night air. Harry paused on the doorstep and took a breath that was too long and too deep for a 7-year-old's lungs and looked up at the sky. The stars over Privet Drive were mostly obscured by the ambient glow of the suburbs, but a handful of them were visible, and Harry looked at them for about 4 seconds with an expression that was so purely, nakedly relieved that Nico turned away on purpose, because it wasn't his to look at. Thalia put a hand on Harry's shoulder, not gently, exactly, but solidly, like she was making a statement of fact. "We've got you," she said. "Not soft. Just true." Harry looked at her hand on his shoulder and then at her face, and then he nodded, once, like they'd agreed on something. They crossed the lawn. At the gate, Nico stopped. "There's something else," he said. Thalia looked at him. "The power signature I was tracking, it's not just shadow energy." He turned to look at Harry, who was standing between them with his biscuit tin under one arm and his 2 large shoes on the wrong feet because he'd put them on in the dark. "Harry, have you ever made something happen? Something you couldn't explain?" Harry considered the question with surprising gravity. "The teacher's wig," he said. "It turned blue. And one time Dudley was chasing me and I ended up on the roof of the school." He paused. "And sometimes when I'm very scared or very, I don't know, when something feels wrong, the lights do something. Or the sky." "The sky," Thalia said carefully. "What does the sky do?" Harry looked up at the clear night and then back at her. "Flashes," he said. "But there aren't any clouds. My aunt says I'm making it up." "A beat." "I don't think I'm making it up." Thalia and Nico looked at each other over the top of Harry's head. Nico communicated "there's something else happening here" with his eyebrows, and Thalia communicated "I know, I felt it from the beginning" with hers, and Harry watched this exchange with the focused attention of a child who has learned to read adult silent communications as a survival skill. "You're not making it up," Thalia said. The sky above Privet Drive, clear and star-scattered, produced a single quiet rumble. No clouds. No storm. Just sound, like the sky acknowledging something. Harry looked up at it. The dark around his feet deepened slightly, the shadows stretching toward him as if curious. "I really am strange," he said, not with self-pity but with the tone of someone who has accepted a fact and is simply cataloging it accurately. "Extremely," Nico said. "Come on. We're not doing this on a street in Surrey." "Where are we going?" Harry asked. Nico opened a shadow. It spread from under his feet and around them in a circle of absolute darkness, not threatening, just there, the way the dark under your bed is just there, familiar and total and his. Harry watched it appear and did not step back. He watched the darkness with the same expression he'd turned on the stars, recognition, barely contained. "Underworld," Nico said. "Right," Harry said, as if this was a normal word that normal people said. "Then, is that underground?" "Yes. I've always liked underground," Harry said, and stepped into the shadow without waiting. Nico and Thalia exchanged one more look, this one carrying something that might have been did that just happen, and stepped in after him. Shadow traveling with a passenger was something Nico had done before, but never with a passenger whose own shadow energy was live and reactive. The moment Harry entered the shadow passage, something unusual happened. The shadows didn't just carry him, they welcomed him, the darkness parting and reshaping around him with a fluency that it took demigods years of practice to achieve. Harry stood in the between space, that lightless tunnel between here and there, with his eyes open wide and the darkness alive around him, and his expression was the most open, most purely joyful expression Nico had seen on a face in approximately 4 years. "Oh," Harry said, "in the dark." "Just that." "Oh." The transit took about 6 seconds and deposited them at the edge of the realm where the world of the living thinned out and the world of the dead began, at a place Nico knew as a checkpoint, not the actual gates of the underworld but a kind of antechamber that Hades maintained for exactly this kind of situation, where the living needed to enter without fully crossing over. It was a space of black marble floors and low, cool lighting, and it smelled like stone and old water and something metallic that was very clean. Harry stepped out of the shadow and onto the black marble and looked around. The darkness that had gathered around him in the transit dispersed slowly, reluctantly, like it wanted to stay. That, he said, was brilliant. Don't get used to it, Nico said, out of pure reflex, and Thalia elbowed him. Ignore him, she said to Harry. He says things like that to everyone he likes. Harry looked at Nico with what might have been a small smile. The bruise along his jaw caught the pale light of the antechamber, and Nico looked at it for one moment and then looked away and set that aside to be dealt with later in the particular internal cabinet where he stored the things he intended to do something about. He turned to look at the far end of the antechamber, where the air had the quality of an audience about to begin. He's already here, isn't he? Thalia said. Not a question. He was here before we arrived, Nico said. Harry followed their gaze, and for the first time since Nico had opened the cupboard door, he went still in a way that was not composure but something more primitive, the animal recognition that something enormous was paying attention to you. The antechamber's low light deepened at the far end, and the shadow there moved the way no shadow naturally moved, collecting itself, taking on weight and presence and the slow terrible patience of something that had existed since before light bothered to define itself against darkness. Hades was not visible, not precisely, but he was present in the way that earthquakes are present before they arrive, the feeling in your bones, the tightening of the air. Harry stood between two demigods at the edge of the living world, with a biscuit tin under his arm and two large shoes on slightly wrong feet, and he looked at the collected darkness at the end of the antechamber, and he took a long, steady breath, and he did not flinch. The darkness at the far end shifted. In it, if you looked carefully, two lights resolved, not glowing, not warm, but present. Eyes, ancient and very attentive, finding Harry with the precision of something that did not miss things. What came from the darkness was not a voice so much as the sensation of a voice, low, resonant, the kind of frequency that bypasses ears entirely and addresses the skeleton directly. Interesting. The shadows in the antechamber spread and deepened, and Harry's shadow on the black marble floor stretched toward Hades instead of away from him, pulled by something that wasn't physics, and Harry looked down at it with wide eyes and then back at the darkness and said, with complete seriousness, "Hello." A beat of silence in the antechamber. Then the lights in the darkness shifted, and the presence of Hades shifted with it, and what passed through the room was something that Nico, in 5 years of being his father's son, had never heard before. The god of the dead was amused. What is he? Thalia said, quietly, to Nico. Not with fear. With the tone of someone working out a puzzle that kept producing unexpected variables. I don't know, Nico said, watching Harry stand perfectly still with his shadow reaching toward the king of the underworld. But my father does. Harry turned to look at them. The green of his eyes in the pale light of the antechamber was very dark. Is this your father? He asked Nico. Yes. Harry turned back to the darkness. He squared his narrow shoulders, settled the biscuit tin more firmly under his arm, and looked at the presence of Hades with the expression of someone who has very little left to lose and has therefore stopped being afraid of anything. Sir, he said, clear and even. I don't know why I'm here. But I'm glad to be out of the cupboard. The darkness moved. The antechamber shifted. The ancient, cold, eternal intelligence that was Hades focused on the 7-year-old boy standing on black marble with a biscuit tin and a taped-together pair of glasses and a healing bruise on his jaw, and it looked at the wild, unclassified, impossible energy coming off the boy in waves, and it looked at the shadow that was reaching for him like a dog recognizing its owner, and the lights in the dark that were Hades's eyes were very still. Sit down, boy, the darkness said. And then, in a tone that was not kindness, precisely, but was something adjacent to it that gods occasionally produced by accident, you've had a long night. Harry sat, cross-legged, on the black marble floor. He opened his biscuit tin. Inside, Nico glimpsed a small pile of coins, a photograph, and a stub of pencil. Harry looked at the photograph for a moment and then closed the tin and held it in both hands and looked at the darkness with those October green eyes and waited. Nico sat on the marble beside him, which surprised him as he did it. Thalia dropped down on Harry's other side, pulled her knees up, and looked at the darkness with the expression she used on her father when she was prepared to disagree with him. 3 children at the edge of the living world, with the king of the dead paying very close attention. Outside, on the surface, the night over Surrey continued without them. In a cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive, a thin blanket lay on a narrow cot and the spider in the crack above it moved in the dark, undisturbed. A biscuit tin's rectangular outline was pressed into the wooden floor where it had rested for months. In the sitting room, Vernon Dursley snored. In the antechamber of the Underworld, Harry Potter sat on black marble and waited to find out what happened next, and the shadows moved around him like they were glad to have him there, and he pressed his hand flat to the floor and felt, for the first time in his 7 years of life, the ground beneath him warm up slightly, as if the earth itself recognized something in the boy and was responding to him the way it responded to Nico, with the particular dark welcome that said, "You belong to. What is below, and what is below belongs to you." Harry looked down at his palm on the black marble. In the very center of his palm, for just a moment, was the shadow of something that was not there, the shadow of a lightning bolt, crisp and sharp, cast by nothing. He stared at it. Then he looked up at the darkness where Hades waited, and the god of the dead looked back, and something passed between them that was not quite a conversation and not quite a recognition and was, perhaps, the beginning of a decision. Thalia saw the shadow on Harry's palm and said nothing, but the blue-white flicker around her knuckles pulsed once, strong, like an echo. Nico saw it too and said nothing, but he thought about the briefing, about the word unclassified, about the way his father had said interesting in a tone he'd never heard before. Harry closed his hand. "I'm not going back," he said. "Quiet. Certain. To that house. I'm not going back." No one in the antechamber told him he was wrong. Outside, in the space between the shadows at the edge of the entrance to the Underworld, where the stone walls carried the names of the dead in languages older than England, older than Rome, older than any city that had ever tried to be permanent, the rock face shifted. 1 inch, barely perceptible. And in the new space, as if it had always been there, was a single name. Not carved by any hand currently in the room. Just, Harry J. Potter. Nico looked at it. Looked at his father's presence in the darkness. "Did you do that?" he asked. The lights in the darkness shifted. What passed through the room was, again, that strange rumor of amusement. "Not yet," said Hades. "That was the stone. The stone keeps records that I haven't written yet." Nico looked at the name in the rock. The rock that had been recording the names of Hades's children since before Greece was young. He looked at Harry, who was sitting cross-legged on the black marble with a biscuit tin, unaware that the wall beside him had just carved his name into itself, unaware of what that meant, looking at the darkness with patient green eyes and waiting. "Huh," Nico said, which was not the most articulate response he'd ever produced but was, he felt, accurate to the situation. Thalia looked at the name in the rock and looked at Harry and looked at the name again, and in her eyes the blue-white light moved slowly, like lightning deciding which way to go. "Well," she said, and the word carried the weight of someone who has just watched the shape of the next 6 months arrange themselves into view and has decided to walk into it anyway. "This is going to be interesting." From the darkness at the far end of the antechamber, the ancient intelligence that was Hades offered no disagreement. In the rock beside Harry Potter's name, a new thing appeared, slowly, letter by letter, as the stone made room for what it knew was coming. Not a death record. Something else. Something the rock hadn't carved since the last time the world needed a new kind of god and had chosen its vessel from the ranks of those who had survived being broken, which was the only reliable forge the world had ever found. Harry looked at the wall. He couldn't read what was written there. It was in Greek, Old Greek, the formal dialect of divine records, but Nico could. He read it twice to make sure he had it right. Then he looked at his father's presence in the dark and said, in the same language, "You already decided." "I always decide before I send you," Hades said, in Greek, quiet and exact. "I sent you to confirm what I already knew. The stone simply agrees with me." "What does it say?" Thalia asked, in Greek, leaning over to read. Her eyes moved along the text and she sat back and was quiet for a moment. Harry watched both of them. "What does it say?" he asked, in English, looking at Nico. Nico considered the correct way to tell a 7-year-old who had just escaped a cupboard that the god of the dead had apparently made a decision about his future. He decided there was no correct way. He decided straightforward was fine. It says, Nico said, that you're going to become a god. Harry blinked. Once. He looked at the wall and then at Nico and then at the dark where Hades waited. Oh, he said. He looked down at his biscuit tin and then back up. Can I still keep my photograph? The lights in the dark moved. The ancient cold humor of Hades moved through the room again, stronger this time, carrying with it the quality of something genuinely surprised. Yes, said the king of the dead. You may keep your photograph. Okay, Harry said. Okay. He held the biscuit tin to his chest. He looked around at the black marble and the pale cold light and the wall with his name on it and Nico sitting beside him and Thalia sitting on the other side, and he said, very quietly, to no one in particular, I knew the dark was trying to tell me something. Nico put his hand, palm up, on the marble between them. Not reaching. Just there. An offer. Harry looked at it. He looked at Nico's face. He put his hand in Nico's, which was cool and thin and smelled faintly of grave soil, and Nico closed his fingers and didn't say anything, and neither did Harry, and in the antechamber of the underworld the shadows held them and the wall kept its record and the god of the dead watched from the dark and decided, quietly, with the finality of someone who has been deciding things since before the world learned to count its years, that this was correct. This was exactly correct. Outside, somewhere between Surrey and elsewhere, a storm was building over the English countryside that had no meteorological explanation. Thalia felt it in the small bones of her wrists. She pressed her fingers to the marble floor and felt the electricity moving in the stone the way lightning moved in storm clouds, not destructive, not yet, just looking for the right place to become itself. She looked at Harry. He was sitting with his hand in Nico's and his biscuit tin in his other arm and his eyes were drooping because he was 7 years old and it was past midnight and whatever formidable thing was happening to him, he was still a child who needed sleep. Hey, Thalia said softly. Harry looked at her. You can sleep if you want. We're not going anywhere. He looked at her with those green eyes that held too much knowledge of the world for 7 years and said, You'll still be here when I wake up? Yeah, she said. We'll still be here. He looked at Nico, who nodded once, which for Nico was practically effusive. Harry settled his biscuit tin in his lap and leaned slightly against Nico's arm and closed his eyes, and within 4 minutes his breathing evened out into sleep. The shadows in the antechamber softened around him, doing something Nico had never seen shadows do before, which was arrange themselves into something that looked, if you squinted, like a blanket. Like the dark itself was making sure he was warm. Nico stared at the ceiling of the antechamber. His power is dual signature, he said, quietly, to his father's presence in the dark. Shadow energy and something else. Something electrical. Yes. Both domains. In one child. Yes. That's not possible. The lights in the darkness turned toward him, and Nico felt what he always felt when his father looked at him directly, the full weight of what Hades was, ancient and absolute and entirely disinterested in the word impossible. Most things that have ever mattered were impossible first, said Hades. Sleep, Nico. You have done well tonight. Nico looked at the sleeping child against his arm and the shadows tucked around him and the name in the wall and the photograph in the biscuit tin that he hadn't seen but felt through the metal, 2 faces, young and smiling, one with green eyes and one with dark hair and a laugh that had left an impression in the world even years after the person who laughed it had. He thought, I see it, Dad. I understand why you sent us. He didn't say it out loud. Hades knew. Thalia was looking at the antechamber ceiling, arms crossed, one boot tapping a slow rhythm on the black marble, and the blue-white light around her knuckles had gone to something steady and low, the electrical equivalent of a quiet flame. She was thinking hard. Nico could tell because she'd stopped talking. Zeus isn't going to like this, she said eventually. No, Nico agreed. He'll call it an imbalance. A violation of the divine order. hill, she stopped. She looked at Harry asleep on the marble, small and thin and breathing evenly. The shadows settled around him. She looked at the bruise on his jaw. She looked at the biscuit tin with its bent lid and its meager treasury. She looked at the one-lace one-string shoes. She finished her sentence differently than she'd started it. "He can say whatever he wants," she said. "He can take it up with me." The storm over the English countryside that had no meteorological explanation grew a little stronger. The antechamber of the underworld was quiet, and cold, and entirely unhurried, and in it a god of the dead made plans with the patience of eternity, and two demigods sat on either side of a sleeping child who had spent his whole short life being told he was nothing, and who was, in fact, something that the world had not yet invented the right word for. The stone wall had tried. In Old Greek, in the formal dialect of divine records, beside the name Harry J. Potter, it had carved a title that had not been used since the world was young. Shadewalker. Stormborn. Claimant of the in-between. The name for what you were when the dark and the lightning both said, him. That one. Ours. Harry Potter slept on black marble, held by shadows, flanked by demigods, watched by a god, unaware of any of it. He was smiling in his sleep. It was the first time he'd smiled while sleeping in 4 years. The stone recorded that too. Chapter 2, The King's Offer. Harry woke up to the sound of arguing. Not the kind of arguing he knew from Privet Drive, that had a particular texture, loud and mean and designed to land on him like weight. This was different. This was two people who argued the way other people breathed, with a certain competence and rhythm that suggested they'd been doing it long enough to have developed specialized vocabulary for it. "I'm just saying, there should be a process. There is a process. Dad has a process. We're in the middle of it. The process should probably involve explaining things to him before he wakes up surrounded by dead people. There are no dead people here right now, Thalia. This is the antechamber. There are absolutely dead people here. I can feel them through the floor. That's just ambient." Harry opened his eyes. The antechamber was exactly as he'd left it when he'd fallen asleep, black marble, pale cold light, the stone wall with writing he couldn't read. The difference was that now, sitting cross-legged in front of him and slightly to the left, were Nico and Thalia, facing each other with the particular posture of people in the middle of a disagreement they'd both already won separately and were now just performing for each other's benefit. Also, the shadows around him were still arranged in the shape of a blanket. Harry sat up and the shadows dispersed, drifting back to the corners of the room the way water settled after a stone. He watched them go and noted, with the careful attention he applied to all unusual things, that they moved in response to his position. When he sat up, they pulled back to give him room. Not randomly. Responsively. Nico noticed him noticing. "Morning," he said, pivoting seamlessly away from the argument with Thalia. "Is it morning?" Harry asked. The antechamber had no windows. "Technically, yes. You slept about 6 hours. "Oh." Harry picked up his biscuit tin from where it had rested against his knee all night, apparently undisturbed. He looked at Thalia. "What's ambient?" Thalia shot Nico a look that was 90% vindication. "Dead people energy," she said. "Nico says it's fine." "It is fine," Nico said. "You get used to it." "I don't want you to get used to it on day one." "It's fine," Harry said. Both of them looked at him. He shrugged. "It was fine last night. I slept better here than I have since, in a long time." He didn't finish the sentence he'd started because the end of it, "since before my aunt locked the cupboard from the outside," was not something he needed to say, and he'd learned early that saying things that made adults feel guilty mostly just made them uncomfortable, and uncomfortable adults made problems. "Is there food?" he asked instead. There was, it turned out, food. Nico produced it from a side chamber off the antechamber, a small table with bread and cheese and something that looked like pomegranate, which Thalia removed before Harry could touch it with a quickness that suggested this was important and she'd explain later. There was also water, cold and clear, and Harry drank 2 full cups before he slowed down. He ate steadily and without speaking, and they let him, which he appreciated. The bread was dense and slightly sweet, and the cheese was sharp. He ate everything on the plate. He could not remember the last time he'd eaten everything on a plate without someone commenting on his ingratitude for being fed at all. When the plate was empty, he looked at Nico. "You said I was going to become a god." "I said the wall said that," Nico corrected. "The wall says things. In here, yes." Nico nodded toward the far end of the antechamber. Harry looked. In the daylight equivalent of the pale cold light, unchanged, constant, underground light that made no distinction between day and night, the writing in the stone was clearer. He still couldn't read it. But it was there. "Your father made the wall say that?" "My father says the wall decided independently." Nico's tone suggested he was still working out how to feel about this. "He says it records what it knows before he does." Harry considered this. "That seems like a very clever wall. It's been here longer than most languages." Harry looked at the wall for a moment and then looked at his hands. The backs of them had old marks from Dudley's friends and one of Vernon's rings and the gravel of a playground where he'd been pushed down in front of a teacher who'd looked the other direction, and they were also, in the light of the antechamber, doing something he could see now that he couldn't have named last night. The shadows at the edges of his fingers were slightly darker than the shadows at the edges of Nico's fingers or Thalia's. Like the dark had a preference. "Where is your father?" Harry asked. "He's here," Nico said. "He's always here. He's waiting for you to be ready." "I'm ready," Harry said immediately. Nico looked at him. Thalia looked at him. Harry looked back at both of them with the patience of someone who had spent years waiting for adults to make decisions about his life and had recently concluded that waiting was, all things considered, worse than moving. "He means it," Thalia said to Nico. "I can see that," Nico said. He stood from his cross-legged position in a single easy movement and held out a hand to Harry, who took it and came up to his feet. "Come on, then." The far end of the antechamber, where the presence of Hades had gathered the night before, opened as they walked toward it, not a door, exactly, but a threshold, a place where the air changed quality and the temperature dropped 2 degrees and the shadows on the floor began to point in the same direction, the way iron filings pointed at a magnet. Beyond it was a corridor of black stone, wide and high-ceilinged, lit by torches that burned with cold blue-white fire that gave off no heat at all, and at the end of the corridor was a set of doors that were each 20 feet tall and made of something that was not quite stone and not quite metal, dark and faintly iridescent, with no handles. Harry looked up at the doors and the doors looked back, and they opened. The hall beyond was large the way that geological formations were large, not designed to contain something but simply expressing the natural architecture of deep underground space. The ceiling was invisible in the height and the dark. The floor was smooth black stone worn glass flat by something that had been happening here far longer than human history kept records. There were columns, not decorative columns, structural ones, massive and dark, vanishing upward into the invisible ceiling. Between the columns, barely visible, were the shapes of things that Harry looked at and then looked away from, not from fear but from the instinct that some things communicated their nature adequately through presence alone and didn't need close examination. At the far end of the hall was a throne. It was not ornate in the way Harry had seen thrones in pictures, it had no jewels, no carving, no visible attempt to impress. It was simply enormous, built of the same dark stone as everything else, and on it sat someone who had been sitting in that same place for long enough that the stone had shaped itself around them. Hades looked like a man. That was what Harry noticed first, the deliberate normalcy of the choice. He could have looked like anything, Harry understood. He'd looked like barely visible lights in the darkness last night. But in his own hall, in front of a child, he had chosen to look like a man, tall, pale, dark-haired, dressed in plain black with no visible ornamentation, with hands resting on the arms of the throne and eyes the color of old charcoal, not quite black, not quite gray, the color of something that had once burned completely and now held only the memory of heat. He looked at Harry. Harry walked toward him and did not stop until he was standing at the foot of the 3 steps that led up to the throne's platform, and then he stopped, and he looked up, and he said, "Hello, sir. We met last night but I don't think you actually told me your name." The hall was very quiet. Nico, behind Harry, made a sound that was almost certainly him suppressing something. Hades looked at Harry for a long, even moment. "My name is Hades," he said. His voice in the hall was what it had been last night, not loud, not effortful, simply present in a way that bypassed volume entirely and arrived in the chest as fact. "You know who I am." "I know the stories," Harry said. "From school. The Greek myths. And what do those stories say about me?" Harry considered this with genuine fairness. "That you took Persephone. That you're in charge of where people go when they die. That your brothers don't like you much." A brief pause. "That you always get what you want eventually because you're the most patient of the three." The charcoal eyes shifted slightly. "Do you believe those stories?" "Some of them," Harry said. "You seem patient." "I believe that part." "You don't seem frightened," Hades observed. "You're not frightening right now," Harry said, and then, with scrupulous honesty, "you were a little frightening last night. When you were just the dark. But people are less frightening when they look like people. And you said I could keep my photograph. That seems like something frightening people don't usually say." Nico's suppressed something became an actual quiet sound and Thalia put her hand over her mouth. Hades looked at Harry for a long, still, geological moment, and then he said, "Sit down," and a chair arrived, not carried, not summoned with any visible effort, simply present where it hadn't been, low and plain, sized for a 7-year-old. Harry sat in it without comment on its appearance. Hades leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, which made him look considerably less like a deity and considerably more like an adult who was about to have a serious conversation. He looked at Harry with those old charcoal eyes and Harry looked back at him with the October green ones, and neither of them looked away. "Tell me what you know about yourself," Hades said. Harry thought about it honestly. "My name is Harry James Potter. I'm 7. My parents died in a car accident when I was a baby, my aunt told me. I live at number 4, Privet Drive, with my aunt and uncle and cousin. I'm not very good at following rules when the rules seem wrong. I can make things happen sometimes. I don't know how. Strange things follow me around." He looked at his hands. "The dark is comfortable. It's been comfortable for as long as I can remember. I used to think that was wrong. I don't think that anymore." "Your parents," Hades said, "did not die in a car accident." Harry looked up from his hands. "Your mother," Hades said, steady and even, "was Lily Evans Potter. She died casting a sacrificial protection charm over you, the most powerful form of the ancient binding magic. It required her to die willingly, in your place. She did." He did not soften this or dress it up. He delivered it the way the Underworld delivered things, as fact, as record, as what happened. "Your father, James Potter, was killed moments before by the man who came to kill you. His name is Tom Riddle, though he calls himself Voldemort. He is a dark wizard who built a following around the belief that certain bloodlines were worth more than others. He wanted you dead because of a prophecy. Your mother's sacrifice reflected his killing curse back at him and unmade his physical form. He did not die. He has been existing as something less than a ghost and more than nothing for 6 years." Harry was very still. The hall waited. Not impatiently. Just waited. "My parents," Harry started, and stopped. He pressed his lips together. He looked at the floor, which was black stone worn smooth by eternity, and he took 3 careful breaths the way he'd learned to take careful breaths in the cupboard when the dark pressed in and he needed to stay calm. Then he looked back up. His eyes were bright but his face was steady. "She chose it," he said. "My mother." "Yes. She chose it so I would live." "Yes." Harry absorbed this. Not quickly, he sat with it for a moment, the full weight of it, the shape of a decision made years before he could understand it, a love so structural it had bent the rules of what was possible. He absorbed it with the thoroughness of someone who had learned not to skim over important things, because important things skimmed over had a way of coming back badly. "Is she here?" he asked. "In the underworld." "Can I?" "No," Hades said. His voice did not change in tone, but there was something in it that was not unkind. She moved on. "What happens after the underworld is not visible to me." But she moved on willingly and at peace. "I can tell you that with certainty because the record of her passage is one that my realm does not misread." Harry nodded. He looked down at his biscuit tin, which he'd carried from the side chamber without thinking. He opened it and looked at the photograph, two faces, young and laughing, the man with dark untidy hair and glasses, the woman with red hair and the same green eyes, and he held it for a moment and then closed the tin. "Tom Riddle," he said. "Voldemort. He's the one I'll have to deal with eventually." The hall, which had been waiting, shifted in some imperceptible way. Hades looked at him for a measured moment. "Eventually," he agreed. "Yes." "Not yet," Harry said. "I'm 7. "Not yet," Hades confirmed, and in his tone was something very close to approval. "Right," Harry said. He sat up straight in the chair. He put the biscuit tin on his knees. "You have an offer for me," Nico said. The wall said. He met Hades's eyes. "Tell me what it is." Hades was quiet for a moment, and in that moment the hall felt very old and very present, the weight of everything below the living world pressing down in a way that should have been oppressive and instead felt, to Harry, strangely, inexplicably, like being underground in the best possible sense. Like being held by something that had no need to prove its permanence. "You are not a typical mortal child," Hades said. "Your power signature is dual in nature, you carry shadow energy and storm energy in equal measure. This is unprecedented. Every mortal child who carries divine energy carries it from one source. You carry it from 2 domains simultaneously, and those domains are traditionally in opposition." "Shadow and lightning," Harry said. "Yes. The underworld and the sky. Mine and my brother's. In the same vessel." Hades's charcoal eyes were steady. "The energy is wild because it has no framework. It has been building in you since you were born, and the containment ward on your house has been, if anything, making it worse, compressing it, keeping it from developing naturally, until it has become structural rather than circumstantial. It is not separate from you. It is you. Can you take it away?" Harry asked. Straightforward. Not hoping he would. Just asking because the question was there. "No," Hades said. "And if I could, I would not. What I can do," he stopped, and in the stopping was a pause so deliberate it felt like a page turning, "is give it structure. Give you a framework, a domain, a place in the order of things that can hold both signatures without tearing itself apart. I can make you a god, Harry Potter. Not born to it, made. Given the domain of shadows and lightning, the in-between, the crossing places, the storms that rise from deep earth and break the sky." The hall held this offer in the air between them like something with physical weight. "There would be conditions," Hades continued. "Godhood given rather than inherited must be earned, not in the past tense but continuously. You would need to prove your command of both domains through training that will not be gentle and will not accommodate you. You would need to learn what you are, which is a process that will be harder than the training." "And the people who don't want this to happen?" Harry asked. "There are people who don't want this. I could tell last night from the way they were talking." He nodded toward Nico and Thalia behind him. "My brother Zeus will object," Hades said. Loudly and with political sophistication. "There are others on Olympus who will see a new god as a threat to the balance they prefer, which is the balance that benefits them specifically. The wizarding world will object, because the wizarding world has constructed a very specific story about what you are and what you're for, and godhood is not part of that story." He met Harry's eyes. And there is a man named Albus Dumbledore who has been carefully managing the shape of your future since before you could speak, and who will find this entire situation extraordinarily inconvenient. What does he want me to be? Harry asked. A sacrifice, Hades said, not with drama but with the clinical precision of someone who had received sacrifices for millennia and knew exactly what they looked like in preparation. He believes you must suffer, that your pain is part of what makes the protection your mother gave you powerful, and that ultimately you must face Voldemort in a specific way that ends in your willing death. He is not malicious. He believes he is right. He has been wrong before. Harry looked at Hades for a long time. You're saying the wizarding world needs me to die, he said. The wizarding world's plan requires it. My offer does not. Why? Harry asked. Why do you want to do this? You're a god. You don't give things away without a reason. The hall was very still. Behind Harry, Nico went carefully, attentively quiet. Thalia did too. Hades looked at the 7-year-old in the plain chair with the biscuit tin and the taped glasses and said, without any softening, because the balance of the world, real balance, not Olympian politics, requires that the domains of shadow and storm be held by something that understands both. Currently they are held by gods who regard each other as adversaries and make decisions accordingly. The world beneath and the world above have been in conflict since my brother took the sky and I took the earth, and that conflict has costs that are paid by everyone who lives between those 2 points. You are, uniquely, the point at which those 2 domains naturally converge. That is strategically useful to me. And? Harry said, because there was clearly an and. Hades held his gaze. And you were left in a cupboard, he said. For 6 years. With a containment ward on the house to keep your power compressed and your growth stunted and your presence diminished. By people who were supposed to protect you. His tone did not change. The words were flat and factual. I deal in deaths and endings and the passage of souls, and I have seen every kind of human cruelty that exists and categorized all of them, and I am not often surprised by what the living do to each other. But a containment ward on a child, designed not to protect him but to keep him small. Hades paused. One breath. That I found unacceptable. The hall was very quiet. Harry looked at Hades and Hades looked at Harry, and something passed between them that was not pity on one side and gratitude on the other. It was something considerably more mutual, more angular, more honest than that. It was recognition. 2 entities that the world had tried to keep small, looking at each other across the space between a throne and a plain chair, and agreeing, without saying it, that small was simply not something either of them were prepared to remain. Yes, Harry said. Hades looked at him. Yes to the offer. Yes to the offer, Harry said. But I want to be clear about something. He sat forward slightly, biscuit tin in his lap, eyes on the god of the dead. I'm not doing this because you rescued me, and I'm not doing this because I'm grateful, and I'm not doing this because I don't have anywhere else to go. I'm doing this because it sounds right. Because the shadow and the lightning feel like mine, they've always felt like mine, and I want to know what I actually am instead of spending the rest of my life being told I'm wrong for being it. He paused. And because whoever put that ward on the house wanted me small, and I've decided I'm not going to be. The hall absorbed this. Behind Harry, Thalia pressed her fist against her mouth and looked at the ceiling. Nico stared at the back of Harry's head with the expression of someone who had just watched something confirm a thing they'd suspected and wasn't sure whether they were relieved or alarmed by being right. Hades looked at Harry for a long, still moment, and then he stood up from the throne, which he did slowly and with the particular quality of motion that belonged to something that had been still for a very long time, not stiff, but deliberate, like time moving differently around him. He descended the 3 steps to the floor and stood in front of Harry, and up close he was very tall but not in a threatening way, in the way that the ceiling of a cave was very high, just dimension, just reality, nothing performed. He extended one hand, palm up. It was a hand that looked like a man's hand, thin, pale, with the kind of stillness in it that deep water had. But the shadows in the hall moved when it moved, oriented toward it the way Harry's shadows had oriented toward Harry, and there was something in the skin of it that was barely visible dark, like ink seen through cloth. "Then we have an agreement," Hades said. Harry looked at the hand. He looked up at the face above it. He put his right hand in it, his right hand, the one with the marks on the back, the one the shadow of the lightning bolt had appeared on last night. Hades closed his fingers around it and the hall changed. It was not dramatic. Harry had half expected dramatic, light and sound and transformation. What happened instead was quieter and more complete than that. The shadows in the hall flowed toward him, not violently but with the total certainty of water finding its level. They moved through the floor and up through his feet and into him, and where they went they settled, and where they settled they became something that had always been there and had simply been waiting for the right container. The wild, compressed, too big for its vessel energy in Harry's chest stopped being wild. It didn't diminish. It organized. It was like, he reached for a comparison and found one, it was like how the dark in the cupboard had always felt friendly even when everything else felt hostile, but multiplied, deepened, extended into a complete thing rather than a fragment. The dark that had been his companion in a small space became something vast and navigable, a territory, a domain, a language he now spoke fluently rather than just instinctively. And at the same time, from somewhere above, from something that was not Hades and was not present in the hall but was apparently paying attention anyway, a crack of electricity ran from Harry's head to his heels, not painful, not violent, more like a chord being struck. The lightning that had made the sky flash over Privet Drive on nights when something felt wrong settled into the same space as the shadows, and instead of conflicting they harmonized, two frequencies that were not the same but were, it turned out, designed to coexist. Shadow and lightning. Underground and sky. Both of them. His. Harry exhaled slowly. The expression on his face was not triumph. It was not relief. It was the expression of someone who has been introduced to themselves for the first time, and has found that they are, in fact, exactly who they always suspected they were. Hades released his hand and stepped back and looked at him. "How do you feel?" he asked, with clinical interest. Harry opened and closed his right hand. The shadows around his fingers responded. He thought about electricity and felt it available, patient and live, just below his skin. He looked around the hall and the shadows in it were his, completely, without effort, they reported to him the way his own limbs reported to him, instinctively and immediately. He could feel the dead, faintly, their presence in the layers of the underworld below, not threatening, just present, like background noise in a familiar language. And above, through the miles of rock between him and the surface, he could feel the sky. He could feel the clouds building over Surrey that had no meteorological explanation. "I feel," Harry said carefully, "like myself. But bigger." Hades looked at him for a moment and then looked at Nico. "He'll need to eat more," was what he said, with the matter-of-fact practicality of an ancient god dealing with a malnourished 7-year-old. "He's underweight." "I'm aware," Nico said, dry. "The training begins in 2 days." Hades looked at Harry again. "You need to rest and eat and allow the integration to settle before we push it." 2 days. "What happens after 2 days?" Harry asked. "After 2 days," Hades said, "Thalia teaches you to throw lightning. Nico teaches you to move through shadows. And you begin to learn what your domains actually mean, which is considerably more than those 2 skills." He paused. "It will be difficult." "I know," Harry said. "You'll want to stop sometimes." "I know. You won't be allowed to." Harry looked at him steadily. "Good," he said. Hades considered him for one final moment, and then he turned back toward his throne. Over his shoulder he said, in Greek, to Nico, "He's everything I thought he'd be." Nico looked at Harry, who was sitting in his plain chair looking at his hands with the focused attention of someone conducting an inventory. The shadows in the hall were completely calm around him. The stone walls were warm in a radius around his chair that they hadn't been warm before. "I know," Nico said, in Greek. Thalia had come up beside him. She was looking at Harry too. The blue-white light around her knuckles was doing something it almost never did in response to another person, it was sinking. Pulling toward Harry the way his shadows pulled toward Hades. Two domains recognizing each other. "Hey, Harry," Thalia said. Harry looked up. "We should get you some proper food and then show you where you'll be sleeping." She glanced at Nico. "And we need to talk about what we tell Chiron." "Who's Chiron?" Harry asked. "He runs the camp where most demigods train," Nico said. "He's going to have thoughts about this." "What kind of thoughts?" "Complicated ones," Thalia said. "He'll get over them." She held out a hand to Harry. "Come on." Harry took her hand and stood up from the chair, tucking the biscuit tin under his arm. He looked back once at the throne at the far end of the hall, where Hades had returned and was already still again, already carrying the quality of something that had existed so long it was indistinguishable from the architecture. "Thank you," Harry called. The hall absorbed it. Then, from the throne end, without any movement, without any visible response, the torches in the hall that burned cold blue-white fire shifted, just briefly, to a warmer color. Not warm. Just less cold. The way that ancient things expressed that they had heard you and the hearing was not unwelcome. Harry accepted this. He turned and walked toward the corridor with Thalia and Nico, and the shadows in the hall moved aside for him as he went. The next 2 days were something Harry would later describe, when he was older and someone asked him what the beginning felt like, as the first time I understood that the body could be hungry for more than food. He ate, enormous quantities, all of it good, Nico producing food from somewhere in the antechambers connected rooms with the matter-of-fact competence of someone who'd had to feed himself from limited supplies before and had developed strong opinions about it. Harry ate and slept and ate again, and between eating and sleeping he sat on the black marble of the antechamber and let his new domains settle into him. The shadows were the easiest. They were already home. The shadow energy that had always gathered at his edges and made the dark comfortable and frightened his aunt on the nights it made the house cold, it now had structure, depth, a complete language. He spent hours in the antechamber just feeling it, reaching into the shadow against the far wall and finding what was behind it, finding the quality of the dark in the corridor, finding the specific darkness of the space behind the water pipe in the corner where a small mouse was sleeping. Shadow sense, Nico called it. An awareness of everything the light didn't reach. The lightning was stranger. He had to hold it carefully, the way you held something very hot, not because it hurt, but because the control required was finer, more precise, more like music than like brute force. It sat in his chest like a held breath, patient and live, and when he reached for it came immediately and with enthusiasm. The challenge was asking it to do a specific thing rather than everything at once. Think of it like a dial, not a switch, Thalia told him on the second morning, sitting across from him on the marble. You don't turn it on. You aim it. There's a difference. A dial, Harry said. He concentrated, found the held breath of electricity in his chest, and aimed it at the mop bucket in the corner. A small arc of blue-white lightning jumped from his fingers to the bucket, about 2 inches, barely visible, but precise. The bucket hummed. Thalia stared at him. That took me 3 weeks, she said flatly. Harry looked at the bucket. Really? Don't say it like that, Thalia said, but the corner of her mouth was moving. On the second afternoon, Nico took him into the shadow passage between the antechamber and the corridor and showed him what shadow travel felt like from the controlled side, how to feel the destination in the dark, how to hold the connection between here and there, how to carry a person with you without losing them in the between space. Harry stood in the between space and looked at it clearly for the first time, and it was exactly what it had looked like the night they arrived, formless, directionless, deeply comfortable, and it was also, now, navigable. He could see the threads of shadow that connected everything in it, the way roots connected soil. He took 1 step and came out on the other side of the antechamber wall, in a small stone room that turned out to be a storage room Nico definitely hadn't told him was there. Nico appeared beside him 4 seconds later and looked at him. You just shadow traveled independently, he said. On day 2. Is that fast? Harry asked. I'm not answering that, Nico said, and turned around and went back through the wall, and Harry followed, grinning. Thalia was waiting for them in the antechamber with her arms crossed. Was that him? She said to Nico. Yes, Nico said. Day 2, she said. Day 2, he confirmed. Harry looked between them. This is very gratifying, he said, but you're both doing that thing where you say the same thing to each other in a way that sounds like a conversation but isn't, and I think it means something. They both looked at him. He's perceptive, Thalia said to Nico. Extremely, Nico agreed. What does it mean? Harry asked. Nico sat down on the marble. Thalia sat beside him. Harry sat across from them in the way they'd been sitting for 2 days, and in the pale cold light of the antechamber the three of them were a strange triangle, the daughter of Zeus with lightning in her knuckles, the son of Hades with shadow in his hands, and the boy who carried both with the ease of someone for whom the impossible was simply the thing that happened next. It means, Nico said, that you're going to be very powerful. More powerful than almost anything currently operating in either world. Either world? Harry said. Demigod world and wizarding world, Thalia said. You're in both. You were born into one and you've been claimed by the other and now you're building a third thing that's neither. She looked at him steadily. That's going to make a lot of people nervous. Good, Harry said, and the casualness of it, the complete, settled certainty in the word, made both of them go briefly still. It was the same good he'd said to Hades when Hades told him the training wouldn't accommodate him. Not defiant. Not performed. Just the natural response of someone who had decided, clearly and finally, what they were and wasn't remotely interested in being talked out of it. Nico looked at Thalia. She looked at him. They had been demigods long enough to recognize the moment when someone's power stopped being potential and started being character. When the strength stopped being a thing you had and became a thing you were. It was a specific moment and it happened exactly once and it was usually considerably later in the process than day 2. Tomorrow, Nico said, we go to Camp Half-Blood. Chiron needs to know about this, and you need to see the other side of what you are. The demigod side, Harry said. The demigod side, Nico confirmed. And then we figure out the Hogwarts question. What's the Hogwarts question? Whether you go, Thalia said. Whether it's useful. Whether you can walk into the middle of the wizarding world story about you without it derailing into something we don't control. Harry thought about this. I want to go, he said. We know, Thalia said. Not because of the magic training, Harry said. Because Dumbledore's been planning my life since before I could speak and it seems like the best way to change his plan is to show up to it. Thalia and Nico both looked at him. The antechamber was quiet. 7 years old, Thalia said, very quietly, to no one in particular. I was reading early, Harry said. That is so not the point, she said, but she was smiling, and it was the particular smile that Nico knew was the one she reserved for things she actually liked, which he'd seen approximately 11 times in the years he'd known her, and which she didn't hand out without reason. That night, in the side chamber that had become Harry's room, a small space with a cot that was considerably better than the one in the cupboard, with blankets that were thick and real, and a ceiling of carved stone that he could look at in the dark and feel the whole weight of the underworld above him like a hand on his shoulder, Harry lay awake and looked at the ceiling and felt his domain settle around him like tides. He took out his biscuit tin and opened it and looked at the photograph in the dark. 2 faces. Young and laughing. His mother's eyes in his face. She had chosen to die for him and the magic of that choice had saved him and Hades had said she'd moved on willingly and at peace and he was going to have to carry both halves of that, the grief of not having her and the impossibility of the love that had made her death a shield, for the rest of his life. However long that turned out to be. He understood that. He wasn't pretending it was simple. But she'd chosen him, actively and finally, and whatever else was true, that was true. He came from someone who had chosen him when every indication was that the easier thing would have been to run. He was going to be worth that. He closed the tin and set it on the shelf beside the cot, a proper shelf, at proper height, not above a cupboard door he couldn't open from inside, and he closed his eyes, and the shadows settled around him warm and familiar, and somewhere in the bones of the deep earth the stone that kept records added one more line to his entry, and from above, indistinct and wordless, something that might have been the sky acknowledged the weight in the earth below it with a rumble that had no meteorological explanation. Harry slept, and for the second night running, he smiled. Chapter 3, Lightning and Shadow Camp. Half-Blood smelled like pine trees, seawater, and something burning, which Nico later explained was just what happened when 40 demigods trained with weapons and powers simultaneously in a confined coastal space. Harry stood at the top of the hill where the pine tree grew, massive and old, with a golden glimmer in its branches that he could feel through his feet even before he looked at it, and looked down at the valley below and took it in. It was loud. That was the first thing. The training grounds were full of people his age and older, some of them sparring with bronze weapons, some of them doing things with elements that no reasonable meteorological or physical explanation covered. A girl near the archery range had just set 3 arrows on fire simultaneously. 2 boys near the lake were arguing at full volume while the water behind them rose and fell in response to their emotions. From somewhere near a cluster of cabins, someone had apparently set the climbing wall on lava cycle and 4 people were either ascending it or falling off it, and the shouting from that direction suggested the ratio was not in anyone's favor. "It's always like this?" Harry asked. "Usually louder," Thalia said. She was scanning the valley with the automatic tactical assessment she applied to every space she entered, cataloging exits, threats, and points of interest in roughly 3 seconds. "Come on. Chiron will be at the big house." They went down the hill. The moment they crossed the tree line, Harry felt it, the attention. Not hostile, just present. The instinctive awareness that demigods had for power signatures that didn't fit the expected pattern. Heads turned. Not dramatically. Just the subtle calibration of people who'd been trained to notice things. One boy near the sparring ground stopped mid-swing and stared. He was about 12, broad-shouldered for his age, with dark hair and sea-green eyes that had a specific quality Harry would later learn to identify as belonging specifically to children of Poseidon, the look of someone who had once stared down a wave and decided the wave should move. He had a sword, bronze, celestial bronze, Harry would learn, and he was holding it loose at his side and looking at Harry with an expression that was trying to be casual and not quite making it. "That's Percy Jackson," Nico said, without breaking stride. "Son of Poseidon. He's going to have questions." "Should I, later," Thalia said. "Chiron first." Percy apparently had the same read on the situation because he didn't follow, just watched them pass with those sea-green eyes tracking Harry specifically. Harry looked back once and Percy raised his chin slightly, which was apparently the demigod equivalent of hello when you didn't have enough information yet. Harry raised his chin back. The big house was exactly that, a large blue Victorian farmhouse at the edge of the cabin cluster, with a wraparound porch and a screen door that banged in the coastal wind. On the porch, sitting in what appeared to be the world's largest rocking chair and reading something that he set face down on the armrest as they approached, was a centaur. Harry stared for approximately 1 second and then stopped staring because staring at people was rude and he'd made a decision on the way down the hill that he was going to treat everything at Camp Half-Blood the way he treated the antechamber of the Underworld, as real, as his to navigate, and as not requiring him to perform surprise. Chiron was white-haired and had the face of someone who had been a teacher for long enough that patience had become structural rather than practiced. He looked at Nico and Thalia with the fond exasperation of a person who had long ago accepted that these particular 2 children would continue to produce situations for him regardless of his preferences. Then he looked at Harry, and the fondness in his expression became something different, sharp and very still, the look of someone reading a text in a language they know and finding a word that shouldn't be in that language. "Well," he said. "We can explain," Thalia said. "I imagine you can," Chiron said. He looked at Harry. "And you are Harry Potter?" "Yes, sir," Harry said. He'd decided on Sir because Chiron looked like the kind of person who'd spent enough time being respected that responding to it was automatic, and Harry had learned early that the fastest way to have a functional relationship with authority was to lead with respect and hold the boundary setting in reserve for when it was actually needed. Chiron's expression shifted slightly, the way the expression of a good teacher shifted when a student produced an unexpected answer. "Come up, then," he said. "All of you." They sat on the porch, Harry and Thalia on a bench, Nico on the porch railing with his feet hanging because he did everything with the attitude of someone who found chairs conceptually optional, and Chiron listened. He listened the way truly experienced listeners listened, without interrupting, without producing sounds of reaction, without letting his face perform his thoughts before they were fully formed. He let Nico explain the Surrey mission. He let Thalia explain the ward structure. He listened to the account of the antechamber and the wall and Hades's offer and Harry's acceptance. And then he was quiet for a time that was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, just thorough. He looked at Harry. "May I?" he asked, and extended one hand the way someone extended a hand before a medical examination, not demanding, requesting. Harry held out his hand. Chiron took it and turned it palm up and looked at it. He held it for about 10 seconds, during which the shadows at the edges of Harry's fingers did their thing and a brief, barely visible arc of electricity ran from Harry's wrist to his elbow and grounded out quietly. Chiron set his hand down and sat back. "Both," he said, to Nico. Not with alarm. With the tone of someone confirming an answer they'd already half computed. "Both," Nico confirmed. "Simultaneously. From birth, apparently." Chiron looked at Harry. "You're aware that this is unprecedented?" "I've been told," Harry said. "I'm trying not to make it strange by how I respond to it." Chiron was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How old are you?" 7. Chiron looked at him for another moment and then looked at the valley below the porch, where the loud, burning, argumentative business of training demigods continued without them. His expression was one that Harry couldn't fully read but which contained something like the look adults had when they were revising their expectations in real time and finding the revision uncomfortable not because it was bad but because it required them to rearrange several things simultaneously. "He'll need to train with both populations," Chiron said, to Thalia. "The demigod training and," he paused, "I assume Hades intends a separate curriculum for the divine aspects." "Separate and concurrent," Nico said. "And the wizarding world?" "Hogwarts at 11, Thalia said. "We've discussed it. Harry wants to go." Chiron looked at Harry. "You understand the complications." "Dumbledore has a plan that involves me dying," Harry said. "I'm going to go to his school and learn everything useful and change the plan. That seems more efficient than avoiding it." The screen door banged in the wind. Chiron was quiet for a long time. On the porch railing, Nico watched him with the patient attention of someone who already knew where this was going and was just waiting for the arrival. Thalia had her arms crossed and was looking at the valley. "Your mother was a witch," Chiron said finally. "Lily Evans. Extraordinarily gifted. The kind of magical ability that came along rarely even by wizarding standards. And your father," he paused, "your father was a demigod." Harry went very still. It was Nico who told him, the night before, that James Potter had been a child of Hecate, the goddess of magic, crossroads, and the space between worlds, which explained the ease with which James had taken to wandless magic and the particular quality of his magical signature that had baffled wizarding scholars for years. That James had died not knowing his divine parentage, the way so many children of minor gods died without ever being claimed. That the two signatures in Harry, Shadow and Lightning, came not from his parents at all, but from something in the convergence of his mother's sacrificial magic and his own survival, a rewriting of possibility at the moment of impact. He'd processed it the night before. He was still processing it. "So I'm also a demigod," Harry said. "My father was one." "Hecate's child," Chiron said. "Which adds a third element to what you are, though it manifests differently than the primary domains. Think of it as the connective tissue, the part of you that allows shadow and lightning to coexist where they shouldn't. Magic, Harry said. The old kind, Chiron said. Not wizarding magic, though you'll have that too. The original kind. The kind that exists in the spaces between things. He looked at Harry with those experienced teacher's eyes. You are, to be entirely honest, the most complicated thing I have had on this porch in 3,000 years of teaching. Sorry, Harry said. Don't be, Chiron said, and the warmth in it was genuine and immediate. Training started that afternoon. Thalia took him to the open field at the north end of camp, away from the main sparring grounds, and she started with basics that weren't actually basic. She started with what lightning was, structurally, not the demigod version of it, but the real physics of it, the charge differential and the discharge and the path of least resistance. She explained it while walking in circles around Harry, and the information arrived not as a lecture but as a series of challenges. Why does it go to the highest point? She asked, and when Harry said, because height means closer to the charge differential in the clouds, she said, right, so where does your charge differential live? And Harry said, without thinking, here, and put his fist against his sternum. Right, Thalia said. That's your ground point. Everything you throw starts there. She stood 10 feet from him and hit him with a single arc of lightning. Harry had approximately 2 seconds of warning and he took it. The charge built in his chest and he threw it up in front of him, and the two arcs collided in the air between them with a crack that startled every bird on the north side of camp into the sky simultaneously. They both stood in the aftermath. Harry looked at his hands. The skin was fine, lightning didn't burn children of Zeus, and apparently didn't burn Harry either. How did you know to do that? Thalia asked. Not accusatory. Genuinely asking. It seemed like the most logical response, Harry said. It is, she said. It's also something I didn't figure out until my 3rd week. You need to stop telling me how long things took you, Harry said. It seems like it's bothering you. Thalia stared at him for a second. I hate that you're funny, she said. Don't do that. Do what? Be funny in the middle of training. It's distracting. You find me funny? Harry said. Get ready, Thalia said, and hit him with 3 simultaneous arcs from 3 different angles, which was significantly harder to address than one, and the next 20 minutes were loud and electric and entirely focused on the problem at hand. He was a fast learner. Terrifyingly fast, in the way that occasionally happened when someone's power was native rather than trained, like a person who'd been tone-deaf learning to hear music properly for the first time. Everything clicked at a rate that felt like recognition rather than acquisition. By the end of 2 hours he could throw single-target arcs with reliable accuracy up to 30 feet, absorb incoming lightning and redirect it, which Thalia said was advanced, and do the thing where the electricity ran along his skin without discharging. He couldn't do the big atmospheric stuff yet, the storm calling and the lightning that came from the sky rather than his body, but Thalia said that came later and came from a different place. The body stuff is yours, she said. The sky stuff, that's borrowed from the domain. You have to learn the difference before you mix them. What's the difference? Harry asked. Body lightning is personal, Thalia said. It's what you are. Sky lightning is what you command. She looked up at the clear afternoon above them. They feel different. You'll know when you find it. Nico's training started that evening and was conducted entirely in the dark, which suited Harry perfectly. They went to the edge of the woods at the eastern boundary of camp, where the trees were old and thick and the shadows between them had the quality of deep water. Nico stood with his hands in his pockets and said, "Tell me what you can feel." Harry stood still and let his shadow sense spread. It moved outward from him through the ground, through the roots and the soil, finding the dark places, the shadows under the roots, the hollow in the oak tree 30 feet away, the gap under the large rock by the path, the underground water moving slowly through the clay beneath all of it. He felt the edge of the underworld as a distant pull, like a tide you couldn't see but could feel in the water. Lots of things, Harry said. The hollow tree. The water underground. There's a, I don't know what, something small, sleeping under the rock over there. Snake, Nico said. Oh. Harry looked toward the rock. The shadow sense showed him the small, specific darkness of the sleeping snake like a thumbprint. He found, somewhat to his surprise, that he had a sense of the snake as a presence, not just as a shadow, but as a something, with a small warm consciousness nested inside the cold of its sleeping body. He reached toward it experimentally with his shadow sense and got, very faintly, a response, not words, not even intent, just awareness acknowledging awareness. He looked at Nico. Can you feel the snake? I can feel that something's there, Nico said. I can't feel it like that. That's not shadow ability, that's the Hecate piece. The connective tissue. You've got a link to living things through their shadow sides. Harry looked at the rock where the snake slept. Is that normal for Hecate's children? No, Nico said. It's yours specifically. Stop being surprised by things that are yours. He stepped closer. Now. Show me shadow travel. Show me what you did yesterday in the antechamber. Harry reached for the shadow passage. It opened for him immediately, the between space that was everywhere and nowhere, the connected darkness that ran through the underside of everything. He looked at Nico. Where do you want me to go? The hollow tree, Nico said. Harry stepped into the shadow and came out at the hollow tree in just under 2 seconds. He leaned against it and looked back at Nico, who was 30 feet away and whose expression in the dark was that particular Nico expression that meant he was thinking hard while appearing to be thinking nothing. Come back, Nico called. Harry stepped back. The return was faster, he was learning the rhythm of it, the way you learn the rhythm of a stroke in swimming, not thinking about each component but feeling the whole thing. He came out beside Nico. Distance? Nico asked. As far as I can feel shadow, Harry said. Which is, he spread his sense outward, a long way. Can you take someone with you? Harry looked at him. I think so. But I've only done it once, with you and Thalia, and you were doing half the work on that transit. Hold out your hand. Harry held out his hand. Nico took it and Harry opened the shadow passage and they stepped through together, and this time, without Nico compensating or anchoring, Harry had to hold both of them in the between space, which was different, the difference between carrying weight and just being weight. He held the connection, felt Nico's presence beside him as a specific point in the darkness, and brought them out at the edge of the woods 200 feet from where they'd started. Nico looked around. Looked at Harry. You didn't lose me, he said. Was that the goal? Harry asked. To see if I'd lose you. It's what happens the first several times, Nico said. You pass through without your passenger. It's unpleasant for the passenger. Harry looked at their hands, still joined. I could feel you, he said. In the dark. You have a specific, he searched for the word, temperature. In the between space. Something specific. Nico released his hand and stepped back and was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was deciding whether to say something. Everyone has a death temperature, he said. How far they are from dying. How much of them is, borrowed time, I suppose. You're reading the shadow side of their life force. What's yours? Harry asked. Nico looked at him. Cold, he said, without self-pity. It's always been cold. Harry looked at him for a moment. He wanted to say something and couldn't find the right shape for it, not sympathy exactly, because Nico didn't want that, and not nothing, because Nico also shouldn't get nothing. He said, mine's probably weird. Nico's expression shifted fractionally towards something that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent. Yeah, he said. It is. You read like, both. Hot and cold at the same time. Like something that's alive and underground at the same time. That's what I am, Harry said. Yeah, Nico said again. He looked up through the canopy at the stars beginning to appear above the tree line. You're going to be able to do things I can't. The shadow sense for living things, I can use it for the dead but not the living. And the lightning adds a whole layer I don't have access to. Does that bother you? Harry asked. He wasn't being careful about asking it. He just wanted to know. Nico thought about it honestly. No, he said. What would be the point? You're not replacing anything. You're a different thing. He glanced at Harry. My dad doesn't usually make gods from scratch. He's picking up a power that already existed and giving it form. That's different from what I am. What are you? A soldier, Nico said, without drama. That's what sons of Hades are. We keep the balance. We make sure the dead stay dead and the living stay living and the border between them isn't used for things it's not meant for. And me? Nico looked at him with those old dark eyes. The junction point, he said. The place the border meets the sky. He paused. That's not a small thing, Harry. Harry looked at the stars through the canopy. He felt his domains around him, shadow below and through everything, lightning patient in his chest, the old magic of Hecate threading between them like the roots of the hollow tree threading through the soil. I know, he said. They walked back to camp through the dark and neither of them said anything else, which was fine. Percy Jackson was waiting at the edge of the wood. Not aggressively, he wasn't blocking the path, he was sitting on a tree stump with his elbows on his knees and the attitude of someone who'd been there long enough to have considered leaving and decided against it. He looked up when they emerged from the trees and stood, which was polite, and held his hands in the not holding a weapon position, which was very polite for a demigod. Hey, he said to Nico. Then, to Harry, you're Harry. Yes, Harry said. I'm Percy. He said it without the self-importance that Harry had learned to associate with people who expected their names to mean something. I was at the sparring grounds when you came in. Yeah. He looked at Harry with those sea-green eyes and appeared to be having the specific difficulty that people had when they wanted to ask a question and hadn't decided whether the question was appropriate. I could feel you, he said finally. When you came in the gate. From the sparring grounds. He stopped. Like what? Harry said. Like standing too close to a speaker. Like something vibrating. He paused. I've never felt that from another person. Just from places. The ocean. The deep trenches. Places that feel like they have too much power for their size. Harry looked at him. Percy Jackson was 12 years old and looked like someone who'd already been through things and had come out the other side not harder, exactly, but more certain. There was no calculation in the sea-green eyes. He was just telling Harry what he'd felt because he thought Harry should know. I'm building a new domain, Harry said. Shadow and lightning. It's not settled yet. It's still integrating. He said the word Hades had used. That might be what you're feeling. Percy processed this for a moment. You're going to be a god, he said. Yes. Percy nodded. He didn't look threatened or resentful or skeptical. He looked the way he'd looked during the whole exchange, which was like someone genuinely interested in information he didn't have yet. That's wild, he said, with what seemed like pure honest response. I know, Harry said. Are you staying at camp for a while? For now, Harry said. Until Hogwarts. What's Hogwarts? Wizarding school, Nico said. Percy looked at Nico. There are wizards. There are wizards, Nico confirmed. Yes. How many things have you not told me about, Percy said, and it wasn't really a question, it was the observation of someone adding a line item to a list that was already longer than he liked. Many things, Nico said pleasantly. Percy turned back to Harry with the expression of someone making a decision. Do you want to spar tomorrow? He asked. You don't have to. But if you're going to be here and you're training, he gestured vaguely toward the sparring grounds, it's more useful with someone who's actually good. He said this without arrogance, just the factual assessment of someone who'd been told he was good at combat by enough reliable sources that denying it would be dishonest. Harry looked at him for a moment. Yes, he said. Percy smiled, and it was a surprisingly good smile, easy and genuine and slightly crooked, the smile of someone who'd been hit in the face enough times to stop caring about keeping the expression symmetric. Great, he said. Spar at dawn, it's cooler. I don't feel temperature the same way, Harry said. But yes. Percy looked at him for a moment, the not feeling temperature thing apparently warranting brief consideration, and then nodded and turned and walked back toward the cabins, hands in his pockets, with the unhurried stride of someone who had things to do and knew where they were. Harry watched him go. I like him, he said. He's good, Nico said. He's genuinely good. Not just at fighting. He said it the way you said something about a person you respected and didn't want to reduce to the compliment you were giving them. I know, Harry said. I could feel it. He tapped his sternum, where the lightning lived. It has a temperature too. Goodness. In the between space. It's warm. Nico looked at him. You got all of that in 30 seconds from a stranger. I've had to get things quickly, Harry said. From strangers. He looked at the path Percy had taken back toward the cabins. He has a very specific warmth. Like sunlight on water. I don't think he knows how rare that is. Nico was quiet. They walked back to the cluster of cabins, and as they walked Harry looked up at the sky, clear and full, the stars dense above the Long Island coast, and reached for the domain without thinking about it. Not the body lightning, the chest-held breath. The other thing. The sky thing that Thalia had said was different. He reached and found it and it was vast. It was not his the way the shadows in the antechamber were his. It was his the way the ocean was Percy's, not possessed, not owned, but answered to. The sky turned toward him when he reached and in it, impossibly high above the mild June night, a storm was building. Not a Thalia storm, not the personal electrical thing, an actual meteorological event, clouds gathering where there hadn't been clouds, moisture collecting in the upper atmosphere, the charge differential building. Harry felt it with his whole body and understood what Thalia had meant, it felt different. The sky lightning was enormous and impersonal and had its own logic, and connecting with it was not like generating it from inside, it was like joining a conversation that had been going on since before the earth had a name. He let it go after 3 seconds because he hadn't meant to start it and he didn't know how to manage it yet. The storm above Long Island dispersed quietly, clouds unknitting themselves, the night going clear again. Thalia was waiting outside the Hades cabin, technically Nico's, temporarily expanded to accommodate Harry, with her arms crossed and the specific expression she wore when she'd felt something and was deciding what to say about it. Was that you? She said. By accident, Harry said. That was the sky domain, she said. I know. I let it go. She looked at him for a moment. Don't do it again until I'm there, she said, and it was not a reprimand, it was the practical instruction of someone who'd made that mistake herself and knew what happened when you started a sky event you weren't prepared to direct. The sky domain has its own momentum. If you open it you need to be able to close it cleanly or it will run. I know, Harry said. I could feel that. It was, he searched for the word, large. It's the sky, Thalia said. The shadow domain doesn't feel that big, Harry said. The shadow domain is in the ground, Nico said. The ground has walls. The sky doesn't. Harry absorbed this. Right, he said. I'll be more careful. Good, Thalia said. She held the cabin door open. Sleep. Dawn spar with Percy, then we're doing combined training tomorrow afternoon. Combined? Harry said. Shadow and lightning together, she said. You've been practicing them separately. It's time to see what happens when you don't. Is there a precedent for that? Harry asked. No, Thalia said. So we don't know what will happen. No, she said again. Harry considered this for a moment. "Brilliant," he said, meaning it entirely, and went inside. The next 2 weeks at Camp Half-Blood were the fullest 2 weeks of Harry's life. He sparred with Percy at dawn, which was productive in ways that went beyond the combat training. Percy fought with an intuitive brilliance that was impossible to fully prepare for, and the way he used his water sense in combat, knowing where an opponent's weight was based on the water in their body, forced Harry to develop his shadow sense defensively in ways that solo training couldn't. They were evenly matched despite Percy's 4-year advantage in age and experience, which Percy commented on once and then didn't bring up again, having apparently filed it under the same heading as everything else about Harry: unprecedented, worth noting, move on. They fought with swords. Nico had found Harry a blade in the Underworld's armory, a short sword of a non-standard metal that was black and carried a faint cold heat, celestial bronze alloyed with something from the deep earth that Hades had declined to name but which made the weapon responsive to both Harry's lightning and his shadows in a way that Chiron examined with his arms crossed and an expression of profound scholarly interest. Harry was good with the sword, quickly, for the same reason he was good with all of it, not because fighting came naturally but because he applied the same total attention to it that he applied to everything, including the spider in the crack above his cot in the cupboard, which had perhaps been better preparation for detailed observation than anyone at number 4 had intended. The combined training happened on the 5th day. They took him to the north field again, further from camp, and Chiron came to observe from a distance with his arms crossed and that scholar's expression. Thalia stood on Harry's left and Nico stood on his right, and they looked at him and Thalia said, "Don't think about it. Just, be both." Harry looked at the field in front of him. He felt his shadows in the ground below and his lightning in his chest and the old magic of Hecate threading between them like a translation layer, like a piece of connective tissue between two different languages. He breathed out and stopped managing the separation and let them talk to each other. The result was immediate and total. The shadows rose from the ground in front of him and the lightning threaded through them, not separately, not sequentially, but simultaneously, the way light threaded through water, the darkness carrying the charge and the charge illuminating the darkness. What happened in the air in front of Harry was something none of them had a word for, a standing column of shadow-struck lightning, 3 feet in diameter, perfectly stable, making no sound except a very deep, very low hum that Harry felt in his molars and that made every bird on the north side of camp leave for the second time. It was black and bright simultaneously. Shadow and lightning expressing the same thing in 2 languages at once. Chiron, 50 feet away, said something in ancient Greek that Harry would later learn translated roughly as "Oh, by the fates." Thalia said nothing. Her face had gone very still, the way faces went still when something settled a question that had been open for a long time. Nico looked at the column of shadow lightning and said, quietly, to no one in particular, "There it is." Harry held it for about 30 seconds and then released it, and the field went back to being a field. He turned to look at Thalia and Nico. He felt, not drained, not exhausted, the way he'd been warned he might feel after using power extensively. He felt correct. Like a machine that had been running inefficiently and had just found the right operating condition. "How do I do that directionally?" he asked. Thalia blinked. "You want to do it again?" "I want to know how to aim it," Harry said. "In combat it needs to go somewhere, not just exist." Nico made the sound again, the one he'd been making for 2 weeks, the one that sounded like someone confirming a hypothesis. He looked at Thalia and she looked at him and they had one of their wordless exchanges above Harry's head, and then Thalia said, "Show me what you think the answer is." Harry turned back to the field. He thought about aiming, thought about the sword he'd been using, thought about Percy's water sense and the way he directed it in precise, controlled vectors rather than broadcasting it. He thought about direction as intention rather than force. He threw a bar of shadow lightning at the wooden post 20 feet away. It hit the post and the post became, briefly, something made of darkness and electricity, and then it was just a post again, scorched black and slightly smoking, with a crack running through it from top to bottom. He looked at it. "Aiming seems fine," he said. Behind him, Chiron pressed his hand to his face in what was either despair or wonder. From 50 feet away it was hard to distinguish. The 2 weeks ended with a conversation that Harry had been expecting and that arrived exactly when he expected it, from above, which was traditional for these kinds of conversations when Zeus was involved. He'd been sitting alone on the hill by the pine tree at dusk when the sky went specific, not stormy, not dramatic, but the particular quality of sky that happened when Zeus wanted someone to know he was paying attention. A focused clarity, a pressure in the air like a question being held. Harry looked up. "I know you're there," he said, conversationally. The sky did not respond, because Zeus was not Hades and did not show up in person for conversations with children he considered problems. But the pressure in the air shifted slightly, and Harry felt the sky domain respond, felt it orient toward the source of the divine attention the way a weather vane oriented toward wind. He reached into the domain and sent back, clearly and simply, not a message in words but a message in the language of the domain itself, "I know. I'm not hiding from it. Come and talk to me if you want to talk." The sky held the pressure for a moment. Then it shifted, and something that might have been the beginnings of storm clouds dispersed, and the clear evening came back. Harry exhaled. He felt Thalia behind him before he heard her. The electrical field she naturally generated was detectable at about 15 feet. "Was that Zeus?" she asked. "Someone was looking," Harry said. Thalia sat beside him on the hill. She looked at the sky with the expression she used for her father, a mixture of complicated things that included affection and resentment and the specific pain of having a parent who was more interested in what you meant to them politically than what you were as a person. "He's going to make trouble," she said. "I know," Harry said. "Not yet." "No," she agreed. "Not yet." They sat on the hill and the evening settled around them, and below the valley the camp lights came on one by one, warm and scattered, and somewhere down there Percy was probably eating an enormous amount of food and Nico was probably reading something in a corner, and the demigods of Camp Half-Blood were doing the specific business of being children who had inherited powers they hadn't asked for and were making the best of the inheritance. "Thalia," Harry said. When Hogwarts starts, you're coming?" She looked at him. "You thought I wasn't?" "I didn't know." She pulled her knees up and looked at the valley. "I'm coming," she said. "Nico's coming. You're not walking into that school alone." Harry looked at the valley too. In the dark below, the warm scattered lights. In the dark above, the cold scattered stars. He was, he thought, exactly between them, below and above, dark and bright, the junction point that Nico had called him, the in-between. He was comfortable here. He was, for the first time in his entire life, precisely where he was supposed to be. "Good," he said. The pine tree behind them shifted in the coastal wind, the golden thing in its branches glinting, and the night settled over Camp Half-Blood and the stars came out fully, and somewhere deep below the Long Island soil, in the black marble antechamber of the Underworld, the wall added a line to Harry's record that translated from the Old Greek as, "Domain integration complete. First convergence witnessed." And below that, in letters that had the quality of something finalized, "He is ready for the world." Chapter 4, The Owl and the Lightning Rod. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late July, 4 years later. Harry was 11 now, and the 4 years between the cupboard and this morning had built him into something that bore almost no resemblance to the thin, bruised boy who'd sat on black marble with a biscuit tin. He was still lean, he'd always be lean, the same way Nico was always lean, the way people were lean when their metabolism ran hot and their power burned continuous, but he was straight-backed and clear-eyed and moved through space with the easy, unconscious confidence of someone who had spent 4 years learning exactly what he was capable of. The glasses were new, proper ones, round and wire-framed, replacing the taped-together pair. The hair was still untidy. The scar on his forehead was still there, a lightning bolt shape that he'd had since he was 15 months old, and that now, when he was tired or drawing on the sky domain, glowed faintly at the edges with a light that was neither warm nor cold but both. He was sitting on the porch of the big house with Percy when the owl appeared. Percy had grown too, 15 now, a year away from the kind of battle that neither of them fully knew was coming yet, though both of them had the feeling in their bones the way you had weather in your bones before the clouds arrived. He was broader than he'd been at 12, with the particular build of someone whose training had become serious rather than developmental, and he was currently eating an apple and reading something Annabeth had assigned him, which he was doing with the focused misery of someone trying to have a relationship with a text that did not want to have a relationship with them. The owl landed on the porch railing between them and dropped an envelope on the wood and looked at Harry with the expression owls had, which was absolute certainty that it had done something important and you should acknowledge it. Harry picked up the envelope. Mr. H. Potter, The Big House Porch, Camp Half-Blood, Long Island. He turned it over. A purple wax seal, a crest with 4 animals. He'd been expecting this since he was 8, had been prepared for it, had thought about what it meant and what he intended to do about it, had discussed it with Nico and Thalia and Chiron and Hades in several long, occasionally contentious conversations over the years. He opened it with the calm of someone unwrapping something they'd ordered. Percy leaned over and read the Hogwarts crest and looked at Harry. That's the wizarding school. Yes, Harry said. The one with the professor who wants you to die. He's the headmaster now, Harry said, reading the letter. And he doesn't want me to die, specifically. He wants me to be willing to die. Those are slightly different things. That's a distinction I don't find reassuring, Percy said. Neither do I, Harry said pleasantly. Thalia appeared in the doorway of the big house behind them, looked at the envelope, and said, "It came." "It came," Harry confirmed. She came out onto the porch and read over his shoulder. The second page was the supply list: wand, robes, cauldron, books. Standard. The kind of list that would be entirely normal for a first-year student who was entirely a first-year student, which Harry was not. "We go to Diagon Alley," she said. "You need a wand." "I need to visit Gringotts first," Harry said. "There's a vault." "My parents' vault." "And a wand," she said. "And a wand," he agreed. Percy looked between them with the expression of someone who'd been adjacent to strange things long enough to have developed a calm relationship with strangeness but still liked to be kept informed. "I'm coming," he said. "You're not a wizard," Thalia said. "I'm aware of that," Percy said. "I'm still coming." He said it with the pleasant immovability of someone who'd decided and wasn't going to be argued out of it by anything short of a natural disaster, and possibly not even then. Thalia looked at Harry. Harry looked at the owl, which was still on the railing. "Can you find Nico?" he asked it. The owl stared at him. "He's underground," Harry said. "Probably in the antechamber. He'll be reading something old and Italian and ignoring the surface world. Tell him we're going to London." The owl considered this. Then it spread its wings and left, with the attitude of an entity that had agreed to deliver a message it thought was probably below its pay grade. Percy watched it go. "Does that always work?" "He's been training them," Thalia said, already going back inside for her jacket. "Training owls," Percy said. "And crows," Harry said. "Crows are more useful. The owl was already here so I used it." He folded the letter and put it in his jacket pocket and looked at the morning. It was warm and clear and the Long Island coast smelled like salt, and today was the day the next phase started, and he felt it the way he felt everything that mattered, as a settling, a rightness, the click of a thing moving into its intended position. He'd been preparing for Hogwarts for 2 years specifically. Not just the magic, he'd been doing magic since he was 7, and what he could do with it now would embarrass most wizarding adults, which was not something he planned to broadcast immediately, but for the specific chess game that Hogwarts represented. Dumbledore's game. The headmaster had been tracking Harry's power signature since it had spiked 4 years ago, had sent feelers through the wizarding world trying to locate the source, had found enough to know that Harry Potter was alive and growing and not living with the Dursleys anymore. Harry knew this because Hades knew this, and Hades found Dumbledore's information network about as impressive as a mortal found a child's map of their neighborhood, accurate within its limits and revealing in what it didn't cover. The question was not whether Dumbledore would try to shape Harry's trajectory at Hogwarts. He would. The question was which version of Harry Potter Dumbledore was expecting to arrive and how fast the gap between expectation and reality would clarify itself. Harry had some thoughts on the answer and had decided to let it happen at its own pace. Diagon Alley was accessed through a pub in London called the Leaky Cauldron, which they found without difficulty. Harry had been briefed on the location and Nico could find any entrance to any underground space within 50 feet on principle. Nico had appeared at camp an hour after the owl left, emerging from a shadow in the corner of the big house's porch with a book still in one hand and the expression of someone who'd been told something while in the middle of something else but had made his peace with it. He was 15, same age as Thalia, dark-jacketed as always, and he'd looked at the Hogwarts letter and said, finally, with no further elaboration. The five of them, Harry, Nico, Thalia, Percy, and Annabeth, who had appeared at the dock at 7 in the morning apparently already knowing what was happening, which was standard for Annabeth, walked into the Leaky Cauldron and through it and out into the alley, and the wizarding world arrived around them all at once. It was like stepping into a pressure change. Harry felt the magical field of Diagon Alley like a layer of atmosphere, dense and specific and very old, built up over centuries of concentrated magical activity. He adjusted for it automatically, the way he adjusted for the underwater pressure of deep shadow, and walked into it without slowing. Nico was the only other one who didn't stop and stare. He stepped out into the alley and looked around with the expression of someone cataloging exits, then looked at Harry and said, "Gringotts is at the end." Annabeth was staring, not at the magical activity, at the architecture. She had a look on her face that said this is structurally fascinating and I have about 40 immediate questions. Percy was staring at everything in the way he stared at things, with wide genuine interest and no attempt to manage his reaction. Thalia was staring at a set of combat robes in a shop window with the very specific interest of someone assessing functional protective wear. "Gringotts," Harry said, and they moved. The bank was enormous and staffed by goblins who looked at the five of them over a long marble counter with the flat professional courtesy of creatures who had been dealing with humans long enough to be immune to their variations. Harry walked to the counter and looked at the goblin who looked back at him and said, "I'd like to access the Potter Vault. My name is Harry Potter." The goblin looked at him. At the scar. Then at the four people behind him who were not conventional wizard school students in a variety of ways that the goblin, with a banker's assessment skills, was clearly cataloging rapidly. "Key," the goblin said. Harry had the key. Hades had retrieved it from the Dursleys' house on Nico's second visit there, which had been a shorter and considerably less charitable trip than the first. He produced it. The goblin looked at it and looked at him and said, "Verification." Harry held out his right hand. The goblin took it and ran one long finger over the palm. The shadow energy in Harry's skin rose to the surface for a moment, and then the lightning threaded through it, and the goblin's expression went from flat professional courtesy to something considerably more alert. The goblin looked at Harry's hand. Looked at Harry's face. Looked at the hand again. "Mr. Potter," the goblin said, and there was a precision in the title that hadn't been there before. "Welcome to Gringotts." Percy leaned toward Nico and said, quietly, "Did the goblin just get more respectful?" "Goblins respect power," Nico said. "It's the only bank he's ever going to take that seriously." "That's honestly refreshing," Percy said. The vault was substantial. Harry looked at the Potter family fortune with the same practical assessment he applied to all resources. It was there, it was useful, he would use it for what it was for. He took what he needed for school supplies and a reasonable operational fund and left the rest. He also found, in the back of the vault behind a pile of old correspondence, a box that hadn't been touched in 10 years. He opened it. Inside was a wand, elegant, 11 inches, with a warmth in the handle that recognized his fingers before he'd even properly held it, and a note in handwriting he recognized from the photograph. "James, for when he's ready. Don't let him find it too early, he'll be impossible." Harry held his father's wand and felt the Hecate magic in it respond to the Hecate magic in him and stood very still for a moment in the stone vault with the torch light warm and orange and the sound of the underground workings of Gringotts all around him. He put the wand in his jacket, inside pocket, and closed the box. Nico was waiting just outside the vault entrance with his hands in his pockets, and he looked at Harry when he emerged and read his face the way he always read faces, quickly, accurately, and without commentary unless commentary was useful. He said nothing. Harry said nothing. They went back up. The wand shop was a narrow place called Ollivander's, and the old man inside it looked at Harry the moment he walked in the door with an expression that was not what Harry had expected. He'd expected recognition, the boy who lived, the scar, the story. What he saw instead was the expression of a craftsman who had just recognized a particular and unusual problem. Harry Potter, Ollivander said. He was ancient and silver-haired and moved through his shop with the ease of someone entirely at home in a very small space. I wondered when you'd come. I have a wand, Harry said. He produced his father's wand from his inside pocket. Ollivander looked at it and his expression shifted again, to something that was part reverence and part professional recognition. James Potter's wand, he said. Mahogany, 11 inches, pliable. Excellent for transfiguration. He looked at Harry. It will work for you, given your lineage. But, he stopped. But? Harry said. Ollivander looked at Harry's hands, which were resting at his sides, and with the specific professional attention of a wand-maker read what was in them. The wand in your pocket will cover one layer of your ability, he said carefully. There are others. How many do you know about? Harry asked. Ollivander looked at him for a long moment. I know about the wand you have, he said. I know there should be a second, for the other component. He reached up to the shelves without looking and took down a box. He opened it and held out what was inside. It was shorter than the first, 9 inches, dark wood that Harry didn't recognize, with a grain that caught the light in a way that was less warm and more precise. Cold-edged. Like the light it reflected had been carefully considered. Blackthorn, Ollivander said. 9 inches. The core, he hesitated. I've been keeping this one for 12 years. I made it when I felt a power signature that I knew would need it eventually. I didn't know whose it was. Harry took it. The shadows in the room moved toward his hand and the lightning in his chest pulled toward the wand and the two met in the blackthorn and the result was a warmth that was not heat and a cold that was not chill and a hum in the 9-inch length of dark wood that was the combined domain frequency, the shadow lightning, the thing the field and Camp Half-Blood had expressed in a column of impossible brightness. 2 wands, Nico said, from behind Harry. 1 for each domain, Ollivander said. The mahogany for the upper, the sky, the light, the inherited magic. The blackthorn for the lower. He looked at Harry with those silver eyes. I have never made 2 wands for one person. I wasn't certain it was possible until now. Harry slid the blackthorn wand into his left inside pocket, mirroring his father's in the right. He felt them like 2 poles of something complete. Thank you, he said to Ollivander. The old wand-maker looked at him for a moment more. Mr. Potter, he said. I've heard things. Over the past 4 years. About power signatures and unusual readings and movements in both worlds. He paused. Whatever you are now, be careful with the school. I will, Harry said. Not for your sake, Ollivander said. For theirs. He said it without drama. Just as the plain assessment of someone who had been measuring power for 70 years and understood the differential. Harry looked at him. I know, he said. He meant it genuinely. They got everything else efficiently, robes measured and fitted, textbooks gathered, a cauldron that Harry chose not for cost but for material quality, ingredients and equipment. Annabeth made architectural observations about 3 separate shops. Percy ate something from every food vendor they passed. Thalia found the combat robes she'd seen in the window and bought them because they were functional and she was practical and Hogwarts didn't specify non-combat robes in the supply list. Nico got new books, which were apparently the most exciting part of the day for him. Dumbledore sent a representative at 2:10. They were sitting at a table outside the leaky cauldron having lunch when a witch appeared, middle-aged, pink cardigan, a smile that worked very hard but had too much intention behind it to fully land. She walked to their table with the certainty of someone who knew exactly who she was looking for and had prepared for the conversation. "Harry Potter," she said. "Yes," Harry said. She sat down without being invited, which told Harry several things. "I'm Dolores Umbridge," she said. "I work with the Ministry of Magic. I was asked to extend some personal greetings from Headmaster Dumbledore. He's checking where I've been," Harry said. Pleasantly. Not accusatory. She paused. "The headmaster is simply very pleased that, he tracked my power signature 4 years ago," Harry said. "He knows I wasn't with the Dursleys. He's been trying to establish my location and current circumstances ever since. I'm not upset about it. He can ask directly if he wants." Umbridge looked at him with her smile going through several rapid adjustments. She looked at the 4 people around the table, Thalia, who was eating calmly and watching with the flat attention of someone who'd already assessed the threat level and landed on low but notable, Nico, who was reading and had not looked up, Percy, who was looking at Umbridge with the open expression of someone who hadn't decided yet, Annabeth, who was looking at Umbridge with the expression of someone who had absolutely decided. "The headmaster simply wants to ensure your transition back into the wizarding world is smooth," Umbridge said. "I appreciate that," Harry said. "I'll be at King's Cross on September 1st. I'm looking forward to Hogwarts. Please tell Professor Dumbledore that." He met her eyes and held them. "And tell him I'm well. I know he's concerned." She looked at his eyes and held for about 3 seconds and then looked away, which was interesting. "Of course," she said, and smiled again. "Welcome back to the wizarding world, Mr. Potter." She left. Percy watched her go. "That woman," he said, "is intensely unpleasant." "She works for the ministry," Thalia said. "It's their aesthetic." "She was reading him," Nico said, without looking up from his book. "She has a diagnostic spell running in that brooch. She was trying to get a reading on his power signature." "I know," Harry said. "I let her get a partial one." Nico looked up. "She'll report back that he's powerful but unspecific," Harry said. "Shadow and lightning both active but unresolved, like someone whose abilities are still developing. Inconsistent with the readings from 4 years ago when the domains were integrating." He picked up his cup of tea. "That gives me the first 2 months at Hogwarts before Dumbledore recalibrates." Nico put his book down and looked at Harry with full attention, which was a thing Nico did rarely and meant entirely. Then he picked his book up again. "Hades will be pleased," he said. "I wasn't doing it for Hades," Harry said. "I know," Nico said. "That's what he'll find pleasing." September 1st arrived the way important days arrived when you were prepared for them, in an ordinary morning that held the weight of consequence the way a bucket held water, fully and without ceremony. Harry stood on platform 9 3/4 with 2 wands and a trunk and an owl that Percy had given him as a school gift with the words "Everyone at wizarding school has an owl, it would look suspicious if you didn't." The owl was large and snowy white and Harry had named her Nyx, and she sat on top of the trunk with the air of an owl who had accepted her situation and intended to be profoundly dignified about it. The platform was loud. Steam and families and children who were excited or frightened or both, carrying cats and owls and cauldrons, wearing new robes that weren't quite sitting right yet. Harry stood in the middle of it and let the impressions arrive, shadow sense mapping the crowd, the warmth readings of life force around him, the specific electrical signatures of the stronger magical users. He was cataloging without meaning to. It was just what he did now. Thalia stood to his left in traveling clothes. She and Nico would be on the train as students, their ages adjusted by a letter from Olympus that Harry had decided not to ask too many questions about. Nico was to his right with his hands in his pockets, already looking bored, which was his expression at the beginning of everything. "There he is," Thalia said, quietly. Harry didn't follow her gaze immediately. He finished what he was doing first, mapping the platform, identifying the points of interest, finding the unusual signatures in the crowd. Then he looked in the direction she indicated. Albus Dumbledore stood at the far end of the platform in deep purple robes, white-haired and tall, with half-moon spectacles and the long silver beard and the specific quality of presence that belonged to people who had been paying very close attention to the world for a very long time. He was not watching the platform. He was watching Harry. Harry looked at him directly. The distance between them was about 40 feet, and the crowd moved between them like weather, and Dumbledore stood still in it the way a fixed point stood still, and he looked at Harry with those brilliantly blue eyes, sharp and warm simultaneously, the combination that Harry had been warned about, the thing that made people trust him even when they should be asking more questions. Harry held his gaze and felt, at the range of 40 feet, the diagnostic working in the blue eyes. The careful, subtle, extremely sophisticated assessment of someone who had been reading magical signatures since before Harry's grandparents were born. He let the partial reading go out, the same one Umbridge's brooch had gotten, incomplete and developing, and kept the rest below the surface the way the Underworld kept below the surface. Dumbledore smiled at him. It was a genuine smile. Harry had expected calculation and found, behind the calculation, something that was actually genuine, concern, real concern, the complicated love of someone who had been responsible for a child's life at a distance for a decade and who was, in his way, glad the child was alive and present. That was the thing about Dumbledore that Hades had warned him to take seriously, he wasn't a villain. He was something harder to argue with than a villain. He was a good man with a plan that required Harry to suffer and potentially die, who genuinely believed the plan was the only option and genuinely believed that Harry, in the end, would agree. Harry smiled back. Sincere enough to be true, managed enough to be safe. The train whistle sounded and the platform began to move toward the carriages, and Harry picked up Nix's cage and his trunk and walked onto the Hogwarts Express with Thalia and Nico and left Dumbledore on the platform. The train was its own world. Harry found a compartment and settled in and watched the countryside appear as London fell away behind them. Nico sat with his book. Thalia had her legs up on the opposite seat and was watching the window with the expression she used when she was thinking about Zeus. The compartment door opened. A boy with red hair and freckles and the look of someone who had not been prepared for the morning to be as complicated as it was becoming leaned in. "Everywhere else is full," he said. "Can I?" "Yes," Harry said. He came in and sat down and held out his hand. "Ron Weasley." "Harry Potter." Ron stared at him. The scar. The name. The specific version of recognition that happened when you'd been told a story about someone your whole life and then met them and had to reconcile the story with the actual person, who was shorter and less mythological looking than expected. "Wicked," Ron said, which appeared to be his honest unedited response, and Harry liked him immediately. A girl with bushy brown hair and an enormous amount of competence visibly about her appeared 15 minutes later, looking for a toad. She swept the compartment with brown eyes that were doing their own cataloging, books and wands and trunk labels, and then looked at Harry with a precision that was different from Ron's storybook recognition. More analytical. Like she was making a first assessment of a variable she'd been reading about theoretically. "You're Harry Potter," she said. "You're the one who's memorized all the first-year textbooks," Harry said. She stopped. Looked at him. "How did you know that?" "You've been doing wand work in the corridor," he said. "I can hear it. You're practicing from the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1. That level of preparation suggests someone who read ahead." He paused. "What's your name?" She sat down. "Hermione Granger," she said, with the tone of someone who'd made a rapid recalibration and was comfortable with the result. "Are those two with you?" "Yes," Harry said. She looked at Nico, who had looked up from his book briefly and then looked back down, and at Thalia, who gave her a measured look and a nod. "They're not first years," Hermione said. "No," Harry agreed. "How are they?" "It's complicated," Harry said. Hermione looked at him for a moment and appeared to be weighing the option of pressing the question against the option of filing it for later. She filed it. "All right," she said, and took a textbook from her bag, and Harry thought, yes, definitely like her. Hogwarts arrived at dusk. The castle appeared across the lake as the boats crossed, lit from within, towers reaching up against the darkening sky. Harry looked at it from the front of his boat and felt both domains respond, shadow rising from the water below the lake and the electricity in his chest responding to something in the castle's own old magic. Hogwarts had a signature. Ancient and layered and enormous, like standing at the base of a mountain that was also, somehow, alive. He felt it respond to him. Not dramatically. Just a recognition, the way the ground had warmed under his palm in the antechamber 4 years ago. The castle had been built on old Earth and it had been collecting magical energy for 1,000 years, and in it were the signatures of everything that had ever happened here, and underneath all of those, in the foundation stone, was something very old and very dark and not sinister but simply deep, and that deep old thing recognized the presence in the boat crossing the lake and went, in some frequency below the audible, "Ah. There you are." Harry pressed his hand to the side of the boat. The lake water was cold and the darkness below it was immense, and in it were things, the giant squid, the merfolk, the specific dark energy of deep standing water that was his in a way that lakes and oceans were Percy's. He felt the lake bed, far down, and the roots of the castle in it. "You feel the castle," Nico said, beside him. "It knows me," Harry said. "Old magic recognizes old magic," Nico said. The boat touched the bank. The sorting happened in the great hall, which was enormous and candlelit and had a ceiling that showed the night sky above, a real sky, or the perfect magical representation of one, and Harry felt the sky domain respond to the representation the way you responded to a reflection of yourself that was more accurate than expected. He stood in the line of first years and waited and watched the older students at the house tables and read the room the way he read all rooms. Dumbledore sat at the head table. He was watching Harry. Openly, without concealment, with those blue eyes and that warm attention that was simultaneously caring and strategic. Harry looked at him once, acknowledged it, and looked away. He wasn't hiding. He simply didn't need to hold the headmaster's gaze to prove anything. Names were called. Students sat under the sorting hat and it called out houses, and the tables applauded in the way specific to their particular culture. Harry watched the hat with interest. It was a magical object of great age and it carried a consciousness in it that his shadow sense found immediately, an old intelligence compressed into cloth and stitching, reading each student it touched and finding the best fit. He reached toward it with the shadow sense and felt the hat's consciousness register the contact with something that might have been surprise. Harry Potter. He walked to the stool. He sat down. The hat came down over his head. The first second of contact was interesting. The hat went silent in a way that hats, even sentient magical ones, did not normally go silent. Then, in his mind, in the specific interior space where the hat's consciousness operated, what arrived was not an assessment of which house he belonged in, but the sound of a very old and very experienced intelligence saying, with complete seriousness, "Oh. What are you?" "I've sorted every student who's walked into this hall for 1,000 years and I have never." Harry sat with his hands on his knees and thought, clearly and directly, at the hat. "I know. It's complicated. Where do I go?" The hat collected itself. The interior space went quiet for a moment of genuine consideration. "You don't fit a house," it said. "You fit all of them and none of them. You've got Gryffindor courage, Slytherin ambition and self-possession, Ravenclaw intelligence and Hufflepuff. Well, you wouldn't think Hufflepuff, but there's something here about loyalty that is quite literally foundational. Where do I go?" Harry said again. The hat thought for a long moment. "Where do you want to go?" it asked. "Given that you could go anywhere." Harry thought about it honestly. He thought about Ron Weasley and his easy uncomplicated warmth. He thought about Hermione Granger and her enormous competence. He thought about what he needed from the next 7 years and what would serve the people he was trying to protect and what would position him best for what was coming. "Where are my friends going?" The Weasley boy, Gryffindor. The Granger girl, same. The dark-haired boy in the back, I can't sort him, he's not mine to sort. The girl with the lightning in her knuckles, she'd be Gryffindor if I could get near her, but she's keeping me out. Harry smiled. Of course Thalia was keeping it out. Gryffindor, Harry told the hat. The hat considered one last moment. Then it thought at him, in the quiet interior space, with something that might have been its own version of warmth. Be careful with this place. It is old, and it has ears, and the man at the high table is very good at listening. I know, Harry said. Thank you. Gryffindor, the hat announced. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry walked to it and sat down, and Ron slid over to make room and said, I'm Gryffindor too. With the delight of someone who had feared being separated from the interesting thing that had entered his life today, and Harry sat with his elbows on the table and felt the castle around him and the domain settled and steady, and felt, without drama, that this was the next phase, and he was ready. Nico ended up in Slytherin, which surprised no one. He sat at the Slytherin table with the look of someone who had decided the situation was structurally fine and opened his book before the cheering from his new house had finished. Thalia, when the hat touched her head, had a brief and apparently eventful 2 seconds during which her expression suggested the hat was learning things about children of Zeus that it wished it hadn't, and then the hat said, Gryffindor, with what Harry was fairly certain was relief. Dumbledore's feast opening speech was warm and precise and contained 3 specific lines that were meant for Harry and delivered through the guise of general welcome. Harry noted all 3. He ate everything on his plate, he always ate everything on his plate, and listened to Ron explain the wizarding world from his specific vantage point, which was both deeply useful and occasionally wildly incorrect, and watched Hermione correct Ron with the efficiency of someone who'd prepared for exactly this. After the feast, in the corridor moving toward Gryffindor Tower, a professor fell into step beside him. Quirrell. The defense against the dark arts teacher, with his turban and his stammer and his nervous energy. Harry had been briefed on Quirrell. Hades had known about Quirrell since September because the dead around Hogwarts had been reporting an unusual presence in the castle, a double consciousness wrapped around one body, the signature of something that was simultaneously alive and not alive in a way that was not the way of demigods or gods but the way of a soul forcibly sustained beyond its natural end. Harry walked beside Quirrell and felt it immediately, the double signature, the cold beneath the warm, the specific quality of a consciousness that had been compressed and attached to a living host like a parasite on a root. Voldemort. Not full. Not powerful. A fragment, barely cohesive, existing in Quirrell's body at the back of his skull where the turban covered it. A thing kept alive by hate and will and the specific stubbornness of something that had decided it would not end. Harry walked beside Quirrell and felt the fragment on the back of his head feel Harry back. There was a moment, brief, barely a second, where the fragment of Voldemort registered what was standing next to it, and what it registered did not match any version of Harry Potter it had built a model of, and in the mismatch was something that might have been, in the ruins of Tom Riddle's emotional range, the beginning of recalibration. Harry kept walking. He kept his power entirely contained, the diagnostic reading that Umbridge's brooch had gotten, incomplete and developmental. He did not look at Quirrell. He did not acknowledge the fragment. He turned a corridor ahead of the first-year group and waited for Nico, who appeared from a shadow at the juncture of the wall 2 seconds later. He's here, Harry said quietly. I felt it from the Great Hall, Nico said. Quirrell. Yes. He felt you. He felt the surface, Harry said. The partial reading. He doesn't know what I am. Nico was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he's not strong enough to be a threat right now. No, Harry said. But he's looking for something in the school. Something Dumbledore's keeping here. He thought about the corridor on the 3rd floor that the feast speech had mentioned, out of bounds and dangerous to anyone who doesn't want to die a most painful death. He thought about the timing, Voldemort's fragment, already in the school, and something in the school worth protecting. The Philosopher's Stone, Nico said, because Nico had had the same briefing and the same 4 years of preparation and had apparently reached the same conclusion. Probably, Harry said. Are we letting it play out? Harry thought about it. He thought about Ron Weasley's easy warmth and Hermione Granger's enormous competence and the castle that had gone there you are when he crossed the lake, and the Sorting Hat's warning about the man at the high table. He thought about what it meant to let Dumbledore's plan run while he watched it from inside it, and what it meant to interrupt it, and what the costs were in each direction. "We're watching," he said. "For now." Nico nodded. He was already receding back toward the shadows at the corridor wall. "Nico," Harry said. He stopped. "The castle knows me," Harry said. "The old magic in the Foundation. It recognized me." Nico looked at him. "Of course it did," he said. "It's 1,000 years of accumulated magic in a building on old British Earth. What did you think it was going to do when you walked in?" "I wasn't sure," Harry said. "You're the god of shadows and lightning," Nico said, with the flat certainty he brought to all facts. "The earth knows you. The dark knows you. The castle is made of both." He paused. "It was always going to know you." He stepped back into the shadow and was gone. Harry stood in the corridor of Hogwarts with the castle warm around him and the domain settled in his chest and the old magic of the foundations humming in the stone under his feet, and above him the sky through the high windows was full and dark and the stars were out, and he felt, with every part of himself simultaneously, that the board was set. He turned and walked toward Gryffindor Tower and the first day of Hogwarts was done, and the next phase had begun. Behind him, in the stone of the corridor floor, where his foot had last touched, there was a shadow that was slightly darker than the other shadows, with the barely visible edge of a lightning bolt shape at its border. The castle, in its old and attentive way, had marked where he walked. It kept its own records. Chapter 5, War on Two Fronts. The stone on the third-floor corridor smelled like dog. Harry noticed it on his third day at Hogwarts, walking the castle at midnight for no reason except that the castle invited it. The old magic in the walls had a specific quality after dark, quieter and more present, the way forests had a quality after dark that they didn't have in daylight. He walked the corridors with the shadows laid out around him like a second set of eyes, and the castle fed him information the way ground fed a tree, through contact, continuously, without editorial. The third-floor corridor smelled like dog the way something smelled like dog when there was an enormous one. It also had a ward signature under the door at the far end that Dumbledore had built personally, multi-layered, sophisticated, with a trap logic that assumed anyone trying to pass it would be operating on either cleverness or power and had prepared for both. It had not prepared for someone whose shadow sense could read the architecture of the ward from 6 feet away without touching it. Harry stood outside the door and read it. 6 obstacles. Each designed by a different staff member. He could feel the signature variations, distinct as handwriting. Fluffy the three-headed dog was just the beginning. After that, Devil's Snare, flying keys, a chess set, a troll, and a logic puzzle involving potions. At the end of all of those, he felt the cold clear specific presence of a very powerful magical artifact, its energy dense and old and carrying the signature of genuine alchemical transformation. He also felt the fragment of Voldemort on Quirrell's head, 1 floor below, moving through the castle with the specific careful patience of something that had been waiting for the right moment. Harry stood in the corridor and thought, not yet. He went back to Gryffindor Tower. October came and the castle shifted into its autumn character, which was mostly fog on the grounds and fires in the common room and Quidditch practice starting up on the pitch with the professional seriousness that Gryffindor applied to it. Harry had made the Quidditch team, Seeker, which Dumbledore had explicitly facilitated and which Harry had let happen because flying was genuinely useful and the institutional goodwill from winning Quidditch was a resource like any other. He was good at it, which he'd expected. The sky domain meant he was never uncertain about where the wind was or what the air currents would do, and the snitch was a shadow sense problem more than a visual one, a small object in three-dimensional space that he could find the way he found the snake sleeping under the rock on the edge of Camp Half-Blood's forest. He was also becoming visible in ways that had costs. The wizarding world had opinions about Harry Potter and those opinions had been building for 10 years before he'd walked into the Great Hall, and meeting the actual Harry Potter produced reactions that ran the full spectrum from awe to resentment to the specific variety of attention that attached itself to the famous and rarely had anything to do with who they actually were. He managed it the way he managed everything, directly, without performance, without softening or sharpening himself to match the expectations of the particular audience. He was who he was in every room. The consistency tended to resolve the spectrum over time, the awe settled into respect, the resentment either clarified into dislike or dissolved into something more honest, and the parasitic attention got nothing to hold on to and moved on. The one that didn't resolve easily was Draco Malfoy. Malfoy was Slytherin, blonde-haired, and had arrived at Hogwarts already armored in the particular confidence of someone who'd been told their whole life that their bloodline was a credential. He'd approached Harry on the train with an offer of alliance that had the structure of a gift and the function of a collar, and Harry had declined it with complete politeness and no ambiguity, and since then Malfoy had been doing the thing people did when they'd offered something and had it returned, making it mean something else. In the corridor after Transfiguration in mid-October, Malfoy blocked the stairs with two large Slytherin boys behind him and looked at Harry with the expression Harry had categorized as performing a position for an audience. "Potter," he said. "Heard you've been wandering the castle at night." "I sleepwalk," Harry said. "Peeves says you were on the 3rd floor." "Peeves says a lot of things," Harry said. "I believe there's a trophy room he claims is haunted by his own reflection." One of the large Slytherin boys snorted, then stopped when Malfoy glanced at him. "The 3rd floor is off limits," Malfoy said. "I wasn't on the 3rd floor," Harry said. "I was near it." "There's a difference." He looked at Malfoy with the same attention he gave everything. Malfoy was clever, genuinely, quick-thinking, observant, and carrying a level of pride that was partly performance and partly something more fundamental and personal that Harry didn't have the full picture of yet. He was not a villain. He was a boy who had been given a map of the world that was drawn incorrectly and had been told the map was authoritative. "Draco," Harry said. Malfoy looked slightly wrong-footed at his first name. "The bloodline thing," Harry said. "I know it's what you were raised on. I'm not going to argue it with you in a corridor. But you're sharper than the argument you're making and you know it." Malfoy stared at him. Harry went around the large Slytherin boys on the left and up the stairs, and Nico fell into step beside him from a shadow on the landing, which made Malfoy, below, make a sound of startlement that Harry chose not to acknowledge. "Was that productive?" Nico asked. "Possibly," Harry said. "He's worth talking to honestly. Most people are. Most people aren't trying to corner you on staircases." "He wasn't going to do anything," Harry said. "He was performing. The two large ones were supposed to be the threat and they didn't want to be there." He paused. The shorter one on the right looked actively miserable about the whole situation. "Goyle," Nico said. "His death temperature is fine. He's not going to be a problem." "I know," Harry said. "They're not the problem." The problem arrived at the end of October, in a manner that was both predictable and poorly timed. A troll got into the castle on Halloween. It was heading toward the girls' bathrooms, where Hermione happened to be crying because Ron had said something unkind at lunch and she had the specific response to social pain of someone who'd spent a lot of time being isolated enough that she'd built her self-worth largely on competence and was still learning to navigate the messier parts of belonging. Harry felt the troll in the castle before the alarm went up. Shadow sense, something enormous, poorly differentiated, moving through the ground floor corridors with the blunt directional purpose of something that wanted to hit things. He felt Hermione's specific signature, busy and bright and currently very unhappy, in the girls' bathroom and felt the troll's trajectory and did the relevant calculation. He looked at Ron. "Girls' bathroom, ground floor," he said. Ron stared at him. "How, come on," Harry said, and was already moving. Thalia appeared from around a corner. She'd felt the electrical disruption the troll made simply by existing, because that was what Thalia did, and the three of them reached the bathroom 20 seconds ahead of the troll, which they knew because Harry could feel the floor shaking. Hermione was at the sinks and looked at the three of them arriving at high speed with an expression that shifted from startlement through irritation to concern when she registered the urgency in their faces. "There's a troll," Harry said. "Don't be in the bathroom." "I'm in the bathroom," she said, and then the door came off its hinges. The troll was 12 feet tall and smelled like things that had been dead in hot weather, and it held a club the size of a small tree, and it looked at the bathroom full of 11-year-olds with the blunt aggression of something that did not do subtle. Ron said a word his mother would have been unhappy with. Thalia had her spear out, she'd been carrying Aegis with her since day one, kept small in her jacket pocket, and it extended with a sound like the crack that preceded thunder. The troll looked at it and hit the wall beside her with the club because the troll's threat assessment worked on size rather than capability, which was the troll's fundamental strategic problem. Harry had the blackthorn wand in his left hand and the mahogany in his right, and he stood in the bathroom and felt the shadow sense read the troll completely: size, mass, the specific vulnerability points of 12 feet of mountain troll, the gap between the plates of bone at the back of the knee, the delicate structure of the inner ear, the simple fact that something this large moving at speed had a momentum problem. He put the blackthorn wand away and reached into the shadow under the troll's feet. The troll's shadow grabbed its ankles. It was not metaphorical. The shadow became structural, solid, gripping, pulling down with the weight of a domain behind it, and the troll's forward momentum met a movable shadow, and the result was 12 feet of mountain troll meeting the bathroom floor at speed with a crash that brought plaster down from the ceiling and shook the windows in their frames. Thalia hit it with a lightning strike while it was down. The troll stopped moving. The bathroom was very quiet except for the ringing in Harry's ears and the sound of water still running in one of the sinks. Hermione looked at the unconscious troll. Looked at Harry. Looked at Thalia. Looked at the shadow that was slowly releasing the troll's ankles and receding back to normal. "What," she said, "was that?" "Shadow binding," Harry said. "It immobilizes. I know what shadow binding is," Hermione said, in the tone of someone who had absolutely read about it and was now recalibrating the information from theoretical to witnessed. "I mean," she looked at him, the actual look, the one that went past the name and the scar to the thing underneath. "What are you?" "Complicated," Harry said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the troll. Then back at him. "I want a proper answer," she said. "Not now, because there are going to be teachers here in about 90 seconds and someone has to explain the troll, but, after," Harry said. "I'll tell you properly." She held his gaze for a moment and then nodded, and Harry could see the moment she filed it, not dismissing it, definitely not, but organized, compartmentalized, held for later with the thoroughness she applied to everything. The teachers arrived. The explanation given was partial and truthful in the parts that were said. They'd heard about the troll and come to warn Hermione and confronted it. What was not said was how the confrontation had ended specifically. Professor McGonagall looked at the troll and looked at them and looked at the troll again and appeared to be doing the specific calculation of a very competent person who suspected there was information not in the report but who also had an unconscious mountain troll to deal with and priorities to manage. She gave them 5 points each and a look that said the accounting wasn't closed. Dumbledore arrived last. He looked at the troll and then at Harry with those blue eyes and the diagnostic running behind them, and what he got was the partial reading, incomplete and developing, and what his expression did was not clarify but deepen, the look of someone whose calculation is producing answers that don't resolve, which meant the inputs were incomplete. Harry met his eyes and held them and gave him nothing extra. Dumbledore smiled, warm and entirely genuine. "Well done, all of you," he said, and it was true in a way that made Harry think, this is the hardest kind of opponent, the kind that means what they say. November brought the first sign that Olympus had entered the conversation. Harry was on the Quidditch pitch at 7 in the morning, alone. He used the early pitch time to practice sky domain work where no one was watching, standing on the ground and reaching into the upper atmosphere and learning the specific vocabulary of storms. He'd gotten better at it. He could now initiate and close a localized weather event within a 30-foot radius cleanly, without the momentum problem Thalia had warned him about. He could feel the difference between body lightning and sky lightning with complete clarity. He was working on using them simultaneously when the air above the pitch went specific. The focused clarity. The directional attention. Zeus. Not a representative this time. The attention was direct, the sky turning toward him with the full weight of a god who had been deciding something for a while and had decided. Harry landed. He stood on the pitch and looked up at the sky and said, out loud, because Zeus was traditional about these things. If you want to talk, come down. The sky held for a moment. Then Thalia was behind him. She'd felt it from the castle. The Zeus quality in the air was something she responded to involuntarily, the way you responded to the voice of someone who shaped you. She stood beside Harry and looked up. "He won't come down," she said. "Then he doesn't talk," Harry said. The sky held for a moment more. Then it spoke, not in words, not the way Hades spoke, but in the language of the domain, the sky vocabulary that Harry had been learning for 4 years. What it said was not a sentence but an intent, and the intent was, "You carry something that is mine. Account for it." Harry felt the sky domain around him, vast and impersonal and enormous, and he reached into it and spoke back in the same language. "I carry what was given to me," he said. "By power that predates the current arrangement." A pause. The sky pressed slightly, not threatening, not yet, testing the edges. "I have full integration," Harry said, still in sky vocabulary, clear and steady. "The domain recognizes me. The earth recognizes me. If your argument is with the recognition, make it to the earth and the sky directly. They accepted me without your permission and they will tell you what they told me." The sky was still for a long moment. Then it withdrew. Not angrily, more like someone who had gotten a response that required further consideration and had gone away to consider it. Thalia exhaled slowly. "You just argued sovereignty with Zeus," she said. "I argued recognition," Harry said. "I didn't argue his authority over the sky. I argued the sky's own judgment." "That's cleverer than arguing with him directly," she said. "It's not a debate," Harry said. "He controls lightning. I carry it. Those aren't the same thing." He looked at the sky, which had gone back to being an ordinary clear November morning. "He knows that. He's just taking time to decide how to respond to something he didn't plan for. And when he responds," Thalia said. "I'll be here," Harry said. The response came 3 weeks later, not from Zeus himself but from Ares, which was the specific kind of escalation that told Harry Zeus was outsourcing his discomfort rather than engaging it directly. Ares arrived in Hogsmeade on a Saturday. Harry felt him from inside the castle before the Hogsmeade weekend was even authorized, the specific hot blunt aggressive signature of the god of war moving through the village like a boulder through still water, displacing everything around him by presence alone. By the time Harry reached the village with Thalia and Nico, Ares was sitting at a table outside the Three Broomsticks in the November cold, looking entirely relaxed in leather and a leather jacket that had not been current fashion since the 1980s, with a motorcycle parked at the curb and an expression of professional confrontation. He looked at Harry the way he looked at things he'd already decided how to handle. "Kid," he said. "Ares," Harry said, and sat down across from him, which seemed to mildly surprise the god of war, who had possibly expected more of an approach phase. Ares looked at Thalia and Nico who'd taken flanking positions without being asked. He looked at Harry. "Zeus wants the domain portfolio reviewed," he said. "The lightning specifically. It's a jurisdictional issue. Zeus can request a review through Olympus formally," Harry said. "If he wants a formal process. He'd rather keep it informal," Ares said. "Cleaner. Informal means without witnesses," Harry said. "No." Ares looked at him. The god of war had a specific quality to his attention. It stripped away social construction and left only the assessment of combat capacity, which was what he respected. Harry held it without flinching and let the domains be present, both of them, the shadow and the lightning, full and integrated and patient. He didn't perform them. They were just there, the way a mountain was just there. Ares held the look for a few seconds. "Hades won't sign off on a formal review," Ares said. "I know," Harry said. "That makes this a standoff. That makes this the natural result of two gods who've been in conflict since before Rome deciding to repeat the same argument with a new subject," Harry said. "I'm not the argument. I'm what happens after the argument, if both domains actually cooperate instead of competing." He looked at Ares. Zeus knows this. You know this. That's why he sent you informally instead of engaging it directly. Ares was quiet for a moment. The leather jacket creaked. The motorcycle at the curb seemed to communicate aggression by proximity. You're 11, he said. Yes, Harry said. You shouldn't be this. Ares stopped. The god of war, who had been fighting since before civilization invented a word for it, appeared to be working out how to complete the sentence in a way that didn't acknowledge that the 11-year-old across from him was several things he found unexpectedly difficult to categorize. I'm aware of my age, Harry said. It's temporary. Ares looked at him for a long, flat moment. Then he stood up from the table and the motorcycle at the curb turned itself on with a sound like a small contained thunder. Zeus isn't done, he said. I know, Harry said. He'll have to come himself, eventually. And when he does? Ares said. Harry looked at him levelly. I'll be exactly what I am now, he said. That's not going to change. Ares held his look for one more second and then walked to the motorcycle and left, and the village of Hogsmeade settled back into the cold November morning around him with the specific quality of a space readjusting after something large had passed through it. Thalia sat down in the chair Ares had vacated. Her face was doing the complicated thing it did when Zeus was involved, the mixture of things she was still working through. That's not over, she said. No, Harry agreed. We need Hades' position clarified before Zeus escalates past Ares, Nico said. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, reading the empty street with his shadow sense, mapping the residual signature of the god of war. If Zeus decides to push formally through Olympus, he won't, Harry said. A formal Olympian dispute over a new divine portfolio requires all 12 to convene. Zeus doesn't want all 12 looking at the jurisdictional question because the jurisdictional question, examined properly, supports us. He wants it resolved quietly and quickly and to his advantage. That's why Ares. Nico looked at him. You've been thinking about this for a while. Since September, Harry said. Hades and I talked about it before I came here. The Olympian political structure is stable when everyone follows the established precedent and unstable when a new element is introduced. New elements get absorbed or neutralized. The strategy is to be something that can't be neutralized without raising more questions than the neutralization answers. Hermione, who had come to Hogsmeade with Neville Longbottom and had presumably witnessed some portion of the conversation with Ares from the Three Broomsticks doorway, appeared at the table. She looked at Harry. Who was that? She said. Ares, Harry said. She stared. The Greek god of war. Yes. Hermione pulled out her notebook. This was her response to information that exceeded her current framework, not denial, not overwhelmed silence, but the activation of her recording instinct. She opened it and looked at Harry with those precise brown eyes. I want the full explanation now, she said. Not later. Now. We're sitting down and you're telling me what you are and what I've apparently been going to school with. Harry looked at her. He looked at Nico, who shrugged. He looked at Thalia, who said, she's going to figure it out anyway. She's been reading about demigods since November. Hermione looked at Thalia. How did you know that? You went to the library instead of Hogsmeade the first Saturday, Thalia said. You checked out 6 books about Greek mythology and ancient divine taxonomy. You dog-ear pages, which is a crime, but you do it, and you were on the divine domain pages. Hermione closed her mouth. She looked at Harry. Are you a demigod? She asked. I was, Harry said. I'm something more than that now. She wrote it down. How much more? Significantly, Harry said. She wrote that down too. And Voldemort is in this school right now. Quirrell, Harry said. She stopped writing. Her pen was still on the page. She looked at him with the expression of someone whose entire foreground had just rearranged. You've known since September. Yes. And you haven't done anything. I've been watching, he said. There's something in the school he wants and Dumbledore put it there as a trap, partly for Voldemort and partly, Harry paused, partly to see what I do. Whether I go after the stone independently, which would tell him about my capabilities. Whether I need help, which would tell him about my dependencies. Whether I follow the rules. He set his hands on the table. I'm not following his script. Hermione looked at him for a long moment, her pen still on the page. Neville, beside her, had the expression of someone who had come to Hogsmeade for butterbeer and had gotten considerably more than that. What is your script? Hermione asked. Voldemort moves on the stone at Christmas, Harry said. The school empties out, reduced staff, reduced student population, reduced witness pool. That's when he goes. I've been reading his trajectory through the third-floor wards, he's tested them twice already, each time getting further, each time Quirrell making the decision to retreat because Quirrell is frightened and Voldemort doesn't fully control him yet. He looked at the table. By Christmas he will. And Quirrell will go through. And you'll be there, Hermione said. Yes, Harry said. Alone, she said. No, Nico said, from beside the table. She looked at Nico and then at Harry and then at Thalia and then back at Harry. She closed her notebook. I'm coming, she said. Hermione, I've read about the obstacles, she said. The logic puzzle at the end, potions riddle, logical construction, I can solve it in under a minute. The chess set requires strategic calculation. I've beaten Ron 37 times in a row. She looked at him with the absolute certainty of someone who had assessed their contribution and found it sufficient. I'm coming. Harry looked at her. He thought about the warmth reading he got from her, bright and busy and carrying, underneath the competence, the specific warmth of someone who wanted very badly to be useful and had been made to feel that wanting things was presumptuous. He thought about what it meant to let her help versus what it cost to let her into the radius of something that might go badly. He thought about what Nico had said about Percy, he's genuinely good, not just at fighting. Hermione was genuinely good. Not just at studying. Yes, he said. You're coming. Ron appeared at the table. He looked at the assembled faces and said, what did I miss? And when Hermione started explaining, his expression went through approximately 7 stages, the last of which was, right, I'm definitely coming too, what time? December came and the castle emptied for Christmas with its specific winter quality, fewer students, longer shadows, the old magic in the walls more audible in the quiet. Harry stayed. Nico and Thalia stayed. Hermione and Ron stayed, which required some negotiating on Ron's part with his family and resulted in Molly Weasley sending an extraordinary amount of food to the castle, which the 5 of them ate in the Gryffindor common room on Christmas Eve with a fire going and the snow coming down on the grounds outside. Harry opened a present from the pile and found a cloak, invisibility, cloak of invisibility variety, silky and grey-silver, with a note. Your father left this with me. It has served its purpose keeping it. Harry held the cloak and felt his father's magic in it, the Hecate signature, warm and familiar, the same thing he felt in the mahogany wand. He held it for a moment and thought about James Potter, who'd been a demigod without knowing it, who'd left a wand in a vault and a cloak with a headmaster and a photograph in a tin box in a cupboard, and who had died at 21 not knowing the full shape of what he was and not having the time to find out. He folded the cloak carefully and set it on the pile. From Dumbledore? Nico said. Yes, Harry said. He looked at the fire. He's accelerating. The cloak as a gift suggests he wants you mobile and capable, Hermione said. She had her notebook open. He's facilitating. Which means he wants you to go to the 3rd floor. He wants to see what I do when I get there, Harry said. Whether I'm ready. Whether the version of me he has on record matches the version of me that exists. He looked at the cloak in his hands. He's also using Christmas. Because the stone is most vulnerable now, Ron said. Because I'm most visible now, Harry said. Fewer students means fewer variables. If something goes wrong he can manage the information more cleanly. He set the cloak aside. We go tonight. Not because he's pushing us there. Because Quirrell is already moving, I've been feeling it since this afternoon. He's in the third-floor corridor. Everyone was quiet. The fire crackled. Right, Ron said. After dinner, then. After dinner, Harry said. What happened next in the third-floor corridor and beyond it happened fast and did not go the way anyone's plan had specified, because plans meeting the space where Voldemort existed tended to do that, and Harry understood this and had prepared for it. The dog was first. The three-headed enormous dog that Hagrid had named Fluffy and that filled the room entirely, 3 heads and 6 eyes and the sound of something that had been alert and waiting. Harry walked into the room and opened the between space at the floor and the shadows rose and wrapped around the dog's 6 legs and the dog sat down involuntarily and stayed sitting, all 3 heads whipping toward Harry with the aggression of something that had been given one job and was taking it seriously. Harry looked at it. He reached into the shadow sense and found the dog's consciousness, large and loyal and following instructions, and said, in the language that had turned out to work with all animals and was apparently the Hecate magic expressing itself, "You can rest." The dog was quiet. All 3 heads settled. They went through. Devil's Snare tried to wrap Hermione and Ron, which it did not get to complete because Thalia set it on fire with a single focused lightning strike while Harry held the shadows back from the others, keeping a clear path through the plant that tried to grab what was in the dark. The keys required Harry to let the shadow sense find the right one. It was cold, iron cold, carrying a specific lock magic, and he had it in 4 seconds while Nico was still eyeing the broomsticks. The chess set was Ron. Ron sat down at the chess board with the expression of someone who had been waiting for a relevant moment and had found it. He moved through it with a speed and certainty that was beautiful to watch, not because he was the best chess player in any room, but because he understood sacrifice, understood which pieces were expendable and which weren't, understood that winning a chess game was about the king's position and not your own losses. He won in 11 minutes and 3 of his own pieces were gone and he looked at the checkmate position and looked at the path it had opened and said, "Go," without looking up. Harry went. The mirror of Eriste was not in the plan. It was in the final chamber, positioned where the stone was, and Harry stopped in front of it and understood what he was looking at and what it did. The mirror showed you what you wanted most, and in the wanting kept you there, and the stone was inside it, retrievable only by someone who wanted to find it without wanting to use it. He looked in the mirror. He'd expected to see his parents. He did, briefly, 2 faces, warm and laughing, the red hair and the untidy dark, standing in some context that was ordinary and domestic and entirely hypothetical. He looked at them for 3 seconds and felt the grief that was always there, the structural weight of people who had shaped you enormously without being in your life, and then he looked past them, and what he saw was, himself. Just himself, standing where he was standing, with both wands at his sides and the shadow domain settled in him and the lightning held steady in his chest, and in his hand was the stone, and he was simply, present. Not triumphant. Not transformed. Just himself, complete. The stone fell into his hand. He looked at it. Small, blood-red, warm with alchemy. He closed his hand around it and turned. Quirrell was in the doorway. And behind Quirrell's eyes, wearing Quirrell's face, looking through Quirrell at Harry with the full attention that had been building since the corridor in October, was Voldemort. Not the fragment. The full soul piece, dominant now, fully controlling the body that Quirrell had let become a vehicle. It looked at Harry with the intelligent ancient hatred of something that had been planning since before Harry could speak, and then it looked at what Harry was and what Harry held and what Harry was standing in front of, and the plan behind the eyes recalculated. Harry Potter, it said, through Quirrell's mouth, with the flat resonance of someone who had been practicing the name like a weapon. Tom Riddle, Harry said. The face did something. A small, involuntary shift, the particular response of someone who expected fear and received recognition instead. Bold, it said. Not especially, Harry said. You've been in this school for 3 months and I've been watching you since September. The trajectory was predictable. He looked at Quirrell's body, at the man inside it, frightened and complicit and increasingly lost, and thought about what was salvageable and what wasn't and made the calculation in 2 seconds. "Quirrell," he said, to the man rather than the parasite. "He can't stay in your body much longer without destroying you. You know that." "Quirrell doesn't decide anything," Voldemort said. "Quirrell decided to let you in," Harry said. "That means he can decide to push you out." He kept looking at the face, past the parasite to the frightened person beneath it. "I can help with that if he wants it. But he has to want it." Voldemort did not like this line of approach. The temperature in the room dropped, a supernatural cold, the kind that came from a soul fragment pressing its nature outward. Harry felt it and didn't move. "Give me the stone," Voldemort said. "No," Harry said. The cold intensified. Quirrell's body moved toward him, not with Quirrell's will, with the fragments, the limbs moving against the grain of the man inside them. Harry tracked the approach with shadow sense and held his ground. "You can't defeat me," Voldemort said. "Not yet. You're 11 years old and I am something that has survived death." "You haven't survived it," Harry said. "You're avoiding it. Those are different things." He felt the domain around him, the shadow and the lightning, both, full and present and patient. He felt the deep old magic of the castle in the foundation stones below, attentive and awake. He felt the between space ready in the shadows at the edge of the room. "I'm not trying to defeat you tonight, Tom. I'm trying to end this specific situation. There's a difference." The stone. Harry closed his left hand around the stone and raised his right hand and hit Quirrell's body with a shadow bind, the same one he'd used on the troll, the same structure, but finer and more precise, targeting the limbs and leaving the head free. Quirrell collapsed to his knees, bound to the floor, looking up at Harry with two expressions on his face simultaneously, Voldemort's fury, and Quirrell's terror, and under the terror, very faint and very late, something like relief. Harry crouched in front of him. He put one hand on Quirrell's forehead. The contact between his skin and Quirrell's produced the effect Harry had read about, the effect his mother's sacrifice produced specifically, the sacrificial protection still layered in his blood, the life-given-for-life magic that had stopped Voldemort once already. Against a fragment this weakened, pressed into skin this directly, the effect was immediate. Voldemort's soul fragment screamed, not with sound, with the specific dimensional frequency of something being forcibly detached from where it had anchored. Harry held the contact and pushed the shadow domain into Quirrell's body, not harmfully, but as the declaration that this body was under the dominion of someone with more presence in it than a parasite had, and the fragment couldn't hold against both the sacrificial protection and the full weight of a domain. It detached. It scattered. It did not die. Harry could feel that, the fragment finding the cold air and moving with desperate lateral motion towards something, away, through the wall, gone. Quirrell collapsed forward, and Harry caught him, and the man was breathing, and the body was his own again, and he looked up at Harry with eyes that were entirely and only Quirrell's for the first time since summer. "It's gone," Harry told him. "Can you stand?" Quirrell tried. He couldn't. Harry pulled Shadow from the floor and built a support structure under him, not flashy, not complex, just practical, and sat him against the wall. When the others arrived, Hermione and Ron and Thalia, all slightly singed and winded from the chess room in Ron's case, they found Harry sitting on the floor of the final chamber with the Philosopher's Stone in his closed hand and Quirrell semi-conscious against the wall and the room cold and emptied of anything that had been Voldemort. Hermione looked around the room with her notebook open. She looked at Harry. "Is it done?" "For now," Harry said. He held up the stone. "We need to get this to Dumbledore before anyone else has ideas about it." "Where did Voldemort go?" Nico said, appearing from the shadow at the doorway with the specific quality of someone who had been tracking an unhoused soul fragment and was not pleased with the result. "Away," Harry said. "He'll find a host. Something will need to be done about that." "I can, not yet," Harry said. "He's a fragment right now. A fragment is less dangerous than a fragment with something to fight toward. Let him scatter." He stood up. He felt the domains around him, steady, unhurried, the way power felt when you'd used it correctly rather than excessively. Not drained. Just used. There will be more to do. Tonight isn't the end. Tonight is one thing dealt with, Thalia said. Yes, Harry agreed. One thing dealt with. He looked at the stone in his hand. Thought about the mirror. Thought about the image it had shown him, himself, just himself, present and complete. He thought about what wanting something without wanting to use it meant, and understood it more fully now than he had standing in front of the glass. He didn't want the stone. He'd never wanted it. He'd wanted what it represented, the ability to protect what he cared about, the proof of his own sufficiency, the quiet evidence that he was enough without anyone needing to give him more. The stone had shown him he already had that. He handed it to Nico. Take this to Hades, he said. He can return it to Flammel. It shouldn't be here. Nico took it. Looked at it. Looked at Harry. You're going to tell Dumbledore you destroyed it, Nico said. Not a question. I'm going to tell him it's safe and no longer in the school, Harry said. That's true. He's going to know you're managing the information. Good, Harry said. It's time for him to know that. Nico pocketed the stone and stepped into shadow and was gone. Hermione looked at the empty doorway. Looked at Harry. She opened her notebook and then looked at it for a moment and then closed it. You planned all of this, she said. Not just tonight. The whole term. I planned the parts one could plan, Harry said. The rest I worked with. She looked at him with those precise eyes, and in them was the thing Harry had been watching build all term, not the awe-and-story response, not the competence-recognizing competence response, but something more fundamental. The recognition of someone who had found, for possibly the first time, a person whose way of operating matched the best version of her own. Next time, she said, plan me in from the beginning. Harry looked at her. Yes, he said. He meant it. Above the castle, the December sky cracked open with a single bar of lightning that had no meteorological explanation and no cloud to originate from, clean and cold and absolute, and then was gone, and the clear winter night settled back over Hogwarts and the stars came out over the grounds and the snow fell quietly on the towers. In the corridor outside the chamber, Ron Weasley sat on the floor with his back against the stone wall and his arms on his knees and said, to no one in particular, I really just want someone to tell me that all of this is normal and everything is fine. Thalia, walking past him toward the stairs, said, everything is fine. Is this normal? For us, she said, yes. Ron thought about this for a moment. Okay, he said. He stood up. I need a very large amount of food. Common room, Harry said. Hermione's mum sent Christmas cake. Brilliant, Ron said, and they went upstairs, and the castle settled around them and the fire was warm and the snow was quiet on the grounds, and somewhere in the deep old foundation stones, the castle added another line to the record it kept of Harry Potter, in the old language that nobody had written in for centuries. First confrontation resolved. Domain stable. Companions held. And below that, in the particular notation the stone used for things it considered significant, he caught the man when he fell. Chapter 6, The God They Made. The Hall of Shadows did not exist on any map of the Ministry of Magic. It existed below the Department of Mysteries, below the lowest recorded level, below the place where the unspeakables kept their strangest and most dangerous work. It existed in the space between the Ministry's foundation stones and the bedrock of London, which was old enough to carry memories in its grain, old enough to have been there when the city above it was a Roman outpost and the ground beneath it was already ancient. Nobody had built the Hall of Shadows. It had simply been there, waiting, in the way that certain spaces waited, patient and absolutely certain that eventually whatever needed to happen there would happen there. Harry had found it in February, 3 months after the stone incident, shadow traveling through the Ministry on a reconnaissance run that Hades had assigned and that Harry had completed in 45 minutes and then spent another 20 minutes exploring below the unspeakables level because the pull in the deep stone had been too specific to ignore. He'd stood in the Hall of Shadows and felt the space recognize him the way Hogwarts had recognized him, the way the antechamber had, the way all old dark places recognized him, with the specific welcome of something that had been holding a shape for a purpose and had just found the purpose. He'd gone back to Hogwarts and told no one, and filed the hall away in the internal cabinet where he kept the things he intended to use at the right moment, and waited. The right moment arrived on a Thursday in June. It arrived in layers, the way important things arrived when multiple timelines converged, and by the time the final piece settled into place Harry had been watching the convergence build for 6 weeks and had his response prepared down to the component decisions. The first layer was Olympian. Zeus had stopped using intermediaries. He'd sent a formal Olympian notice through Hermes, a rolled scroll of cloud-white material that appeared on Harry's breakfast plate on the first Monday of June, and that Hermione, sitting beside him, began examining for enchantments before the scroll had fully materialized, requesting that Harry appear before the full Olympian Council to account for his divine portfolio. The notice was politically immaculate. It cited 4 precedents, 3 divine laws, and a procedural clause from the original compact between the big 3 that was so obscure Nico had to confirm it was real. It gave Harry 30 days. The second layer was Voldemort. He'd found a body. Harry had been tracking the soul fragment since December through the shadow sense, following its cold unhoused trajectory through the margins of the living world with the patient attention of someone watching a chess piece that hadn't made its move yet. The fragment had spent 4 months looking for a viable host, something with enough magical capacity to sustain it, enough willingness to be worn. It had found one in late April, a witch named Bertha Jorkins, an unremarkable ministry employee who'd been traveling alone in Albania, and the coldness in the fragment had become something more structural, more coherent, the specific cold of a will finding its traction. By June the fragment had grown beyond Bertha Jorkins's ability to contain, and Harry felt the transaction complete, the fragment draining the host dying, the fragment moving to something prepared and waiting. Harry had felt it from Hogwarts with the full shadow sense and had found the endpoint in a house in Little Hangleton that smelled of old stone and old hatred, and in the house was a thing that was Voldemort in the way that a sketch was a portrait, not complete, not full, but directed and purposeful and aware. He was building himself back. He needed one more thing to do it completely. The third layer was Dumbledore. Harry had known since the stone incident that Dumbledore's calibration of him had shifted. The headmaster had been watching him all second year with the careful attention of someone revising a model, and the revision had not been comfortable. Dumbledore's model of Harry Potter involved a boy who was powerful but raw, motivated by love, guided by instinct, and ultimately positioned to sacrifice himself at the right moment because his very nature required it. The model had been working until the third-floor corridor, when the Harry Potter who appeared bore no resemblance to the raw and guided boy in the model. Dumbledore had not confronted this directly. He'd done what he did, gathered information, waited, adjusted. He'd asked careful questions over the year and received careful answers. He'd watched Harry's friendships with the specific attention of someone who believed relationships were both strengths and leverage points, and he'd noted the demigods and filed them. He'd been extraordinarily kind and extraordinarily patient, and Harry had been honest with him within his limits, and both of them had known, in the way of two people playing a long and complicated game, that the endgame was coming. The endgame arrived on a Thursday because Thursday was the day Harry chose it, which was the point. He called the meeting himself. He sent 3 messages simultaneously on the Thursday morning, one to Hades, through the Shadow Network, with 3 words, "It's time, tonight," one to Zeus, through the Sky Domain, with the formal request for a meeting that the Olympian notice had been demanding since June and that Harry had been declining to schedule, and one to Dumbledore. A note that arrived on the headmaster's desk with a letter opener he'd borrowed from the headmaster's office during a shadow travel exercise, and that he'd kept specifically for this purpose, so that the note arrived in a way that communicated that Harry had access to the headmaster's own office without permission and had chosen until now not to use it. The note said, "Tonight. Ministry of Magic, below the Department of Mysteries. I'll handle the access. Bring your full read on the situation, I'll do the same. We need to end the pretending. HP." Then he went to breakfast. The morning was ordinary in the way that the last ordinary morning before something large was always ordinary. The eggs were hot, the post owls arrived, the sixth years argued about OWL preparation in the corridor. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table with Ron and Hermione and ate everything on his plate and listened to Ron explain the tactical failings of the Chudley Cannons in last weekend's match with the earnest passion of someone whose team lost consistently and kept attending anyway. Hermione was watching Harry with those precise eyes. "You've done something," she said. "Several things," Harry said. "Tonight?" she said. "Tonight," he confirmed. "Are we?" "Yes," he said, before she could finish. She opened her notebook. "Tell me what you need from me," he told her. She wrote it down without commentary, which meant she'd already calculated most of it and was verifying the gaps. Ron listened and his expression went through its stages and arrived at the one Harry had come to think of as Ron's battle face, the expression he'd had when he'd sacrificed his pieces on the chessboard, fully present, entirely committed, cheerfully unconcerned with his own position in the equation. "What do you want me to do?" Ron said. Harry looked at him. "Stay with Hermione," he said. "She's the backup plan. If the primary path closes, she has the alternatives. Keep her operational." Ron nodded. He understood the assignment, not guard duty, not passive, but the specific function of someone whose role was to keep the most important piece on the board moving. He'd played enough chess to know that piece could be anything, and that knowing what was most important was the real skill. Nico appeared at the Slytherin table across the hall and looked at Harry across the distance. Harry held up 3 fingers. Nico's expression didn't change, but he put down his fork and sat back, which was his equivalent of understood, fully prepared. Thalia, walking in from the side entrance with the late arrivals, caught Harry's eye and Harry gave her a slight nod and she stopped walking for a moment and then continued to her seat with the expression of someone who had been ready since February and was gratified that the schedule had finally arrived. The day passed. At 9 in the evening, Harry's shadow traveled from the edge of the Hogwarts grounds into the Ministry of Magic and walked through the empty corridors of the sleeping building without a sound. The Ministry at night had its own quality, the bureaucratic machinery of the wizarding world running in the dark on its own logic, enchantments ticking over, records sorting themselves, the low administrative hum of institutional magic that had been running continuously since 1707. He walked through it reading it with shadow sense and found it unremarkable, which meant no traps, no preparation, no advanced knowledge of the visit. Good. The elevator to the Department of Mysteries required no key with shadow travel. He stepped through the gate and descended. Below the department, below the circular room with its spinning doors, below the time room and the death chamber and the brain room, Harry stepped into the stone below the floor and walked down through bedrock until the hall opened around him. It was exactly as he'd left it in February. Dark and large and old, with the quality of deep geological time in its walls. The shadows in it were his the moment he arrived, orienting to him immediately, the space recognizing its occupant the way a room recognized the person it had been waiting for. He stood in the center of the hall and let both domains spread outward and fill the space, shadow from the floor outward in every direction, lightning from his chest up through the stone toward the surface in a channel that was invisible but present, the two domains networking through the hall until the space itself was an expression of what he was. He waited. Hades arrived first. He did not arrive from the elevator. He arrived from the stone itself, the way he always arrived in his own domain, present where he hadn't been, the air thickening, the charcoal eyes finding Harry in the dark with the precision of something that did not miss things. He looked at the hall. He looked at Harry, standing in the center of it with both domains spread through the space. He looked at the shadows and the lightning threading through them and the stone beneath it all warming slightly with the presence of the old earth magic. "Well chosen," he said. "I've been here before," Harry said. "I knew where I wanted this." "Yes." Hades moved to the edge of the hall with the quality of motion that belonged to something that had existed long enough to have no urgency. "Your message to Zeus was correct in form." "I know," Harry said. "I wrote it correctly on purpose. He'll come with conditions." "I know that too." Harry looked at the hall's ceiling, invisible in the dark. He needs to. Hades was quiet for a moment with the quality of deep water quiet. You understand what tonight determines? Yes, Harry said. If the Olympian Council accepts my portfolio as legitimate, Voldemort becomes a problem I can address directly without the political obstruction. If they don't accept it, the energy I've been spending on managing the politics becomes available for the war, because there's nothing left to manage. He looked at his hands. Either way, tonight closes the question. And Dumbledore? Dumbledore needs to see what I am, Harry said. Not the partial reading. Not the managed version. He needs to see the full thing and make a real decision about whether to work with me or continue working around me. He paused. I think he'll work with me. He's a good man. He's been making the best plan he had the information to make. Tonight I give him better information. Hades looked at him with those ancient eyes. In the old dark of the hall his presence was enormous and fully real, the god of the dead in his own element, carrying the weight of everything below the world. You've been protecting me, Harry said. Since the cupboard. That's real and I know it and I'm grateful. He met the charcoal eyes. But tonight I don't need protection. I need you to be a witness. Something shifted in the ancient face. Not softness, Hades did not do softness the way softer things did softness. But something adjacent to it, the thing that immortals occasionally produced by accident when something they'd been tending had grown into itself completely. I know, Hades said. That is why I am here. Thalia and Nico arrived through the elevator shaft, Nico in shadow, Thalia with a faint electrical crackle that the hall absorbed without comment. Hermione and Ron came 30 seconds later, Hermione's disillusionment charm dissolving as she crossed the hall's threshold. Ron had his wand out and was looking at Hades with the expression of someone who was processing an encounter with a Greco-Roman deity through the lens of purely British cultural preparation, which was inadequate but earnest. Hermione looked at Hades with her notebook and then apparently decided that some things transcended notation and put the notebook away. The Olympian contingent, she said to Harry. Soon, Harry said. The hall waited. Voldemort came first. Harry felt him before he arrived, the cold specific signature moving through the ministry above, through the Department of Mysteries, down through the stone, following the channel of power that Harry had opened through the hall like a lodestone following a magnetic field. The half-restored body was coherent enough now to shadow travel, which Harry had known and accounted for. The soul was old and intelligent and had been building toward this confrontation with the patience of something that had decided death was negotiable. He came through the floor. He was not fully himself, not the way the stories described him, not the flat-nosed snake-faced being of horror that the wizarding world had built a mythology around. He was close to it, pale and cold-eyed and carrying the specific presence of someone who had remade themselves from the ruins of a terrible choice and whose power, even partial, even building, was real and enormous and dangerous. He looked at Harry in the hall with red eyes that held the intelligence of someone who had read every variable in the equation and arrived prepared. Then he looked at Hades. The calculation behind the red eyes went very still. Tom Riddle, Harry said. Voldemort looked at him. Harry Potter, he said, and his voice was the voice Harry had first heard through Quirrell's throat at 11, flat and resonant and entirely without warmth. You've chosen your battlefield carefully. I chose it because it's mine, Harry said. This space is mine. Everything in these walls answers to me. Brave claim, Voldemort said. Harry raised his left hand and the shadows in the hall moved, not violently, not performatively, but with the total obedience of a domain responding to its owner. The darkness reorganized itself around Voldemort in a circle of absolute absence of light, not a cage, just a fact, this is my domain and you are in it. Voldemort looked at the darkness around him with those flat red eyes and did not show fear, which Harry respected and had expected. You've been preparing, Voldemort said. Since I was 7, Harry said. You've been building since before I was born. I had to be efficient. The domains of shadow and lightning, Voldemort said. He was cataloguing, assessing, reading Harry the way he read everything, with the cold intelligence of someone whose power was matched only by their certainty in the application of it. Given by Hades. Both at once. Theoretically impossible. Most things that have ever mattered were impossible first, Harry said, and from behind him heard Hades make the sound that was his version of appreciation. I know why you're here, he continued. You need the hull. The deep stone of London, old enough to be pre-magical, carries an energy that a restored body can use to anchor a soul that's been fragmented. You've known this space existed since before I found it. You've been waiting for access. Voldemort was quiet for a moment. His expression was the expression of someone encountering a variable they'd underrated. You've done your research, he said. So have you, Harry said. I know about the Horcruxes. The silence in the hall was total. Voldemort looked at Harry with those red eyes, and something moved behind them that was not quite fear and not quite respect but occupied the space between the two. Then you know I can't be killed, he said. I know you can't be conventionally killed, Harry said. You've split your soul across 7 objects. Each piece anchors you to the living world. As long as they exist, you return. He held the red gaze. I'm the god of shadows. The shadow domain includes the space between death and life, the place where unhoused souls wait. I can reach into that space. He paused. I can find every piece of you, Tom. Every fragment. Every object you've wrapped one in. I found them while you were still in Albania. He raised his right hand and spread his fingers, and from the shadows of the hall he pulled the reading he'd been running since February, 7 points of cold dark energy, each one a soul fragment anchored to a physical object, each one visible to the shadow sense like bruises on the fabric of death's architecture. Voldemort looked at the display of what Harry had found, and the calculation behind his eyes shifted, not panic, because Voldemort did not panic, but the rapid recalibration of someone whose fundamental assumption about their own safety had just been structurally undermined. I'm not going to destroy them tonight, Harry said. That's not what tonight is for. Tonight is for you to understand what I am, and what I can do, and to make a real decision about the war you're planning. He lowered his hand. The shadows held the readings in the air between them. You can fight me. I'd rather you didn't, because the cost in people is real and I care about that more than you think. But if you fight me, the shadow domain finds every piece of you wherever you've hidden them, and the fight ends in your actual death. Not your persistent partial undeath. Your actual, final, complete end. Voldemort was still. Or, Harry said, you tell me what you actually want. Not the speeches. Not the bloodline politics. What Tom Riddle actually wants, underneath all of it. Something crossed the pale face that had not been there since Tom Riddle was a child in an orphanage in London, learning that the world was divided into those who had power over him and those who didn't, and deciding with the absolute certainty of someone who had never been taught to want anything smaller, I will never be powerless again. You can't give me what I want, Voldemort said. His voice had changed slightly, still controlled, but the resonance had shifted. The performance had shifted. No one can. Immortality, Harry said. Not a question. Real immortality, Voldemort said. Not the parody I've been living. Harry looked at him for a long moment. He thought about what it meant to want the thing Tom Riddle had wanted, not cruelty, not domination, not bloodline hierarchy, all of those had been instruments, not goals. The goal had always been simply not to end. The most human fear, magnified by an exceptional mind into something monstrous. I'm not able to give you that, Harry said, honestly. But I can tell you that the Horcruxes aren't giving it to you either. You already know that. What you have isn't life. It's refusal. He held the red gaze. There's a difference between refusing to die and choosing to live. The hall was very quiet. Voldemort looked at Harry for a long, still moment, and in the intelligent red eyes was the specific kind of pain that came from being genuinely heard for the first time by someone who was not afraid of you, which was a thing Tom Riddle had almost no experience with. Then the door he'd briefly opened closed, and the cold came back into his face, and he said, "I will not surrender." "I didn't ask you to," Harry said. "I asked you to make a real decision about the war." He looked at the shadows around Voldemort, his domain, his space, completely cooperative. "You can leave tonight. I'm not stopping you. But I want you to know what you're choosing when you choose to come back." The silence held for 3 more seconds. Then Voldemort moved, not attacking, withdrawing, the way something moved when it needed space to recalculate. He went through the floor the way he'd come, the cold signature trailing upward through the bedrock, through the ministry, into the night air above London, diminishing with distance. The hall held its quiet. Ron exhaled very slowly from behind Harry. Did you just let Voldemort leave?" he said. "Yes," Harry said. He's not finished," Harry said. "He'll come back. But the conversation we just had will be in him the next time he comes, and it won't be comfortable for him, and it will affect how he decides." He turned and looked at Hermione, who was watching him with her pen in her hand and the particular expression of someone processing something at multiple levels simultaneously. "The Horcruxes are the real work," he said to her. "I can find them all. I need help destroying them." "Tell me what destroys them," she said. "Something that makes the soul fragment incapable of anchoring itself, fiend fire, basilisk venom," she said, and wrote it down. "There are basilisk remains in the Chamber of Secrets." Harry stared at her. "You know about the chamber." "I'm Hermione," she said. "Right," he said. "I've known since October," she said. "I was going to tell you when it became relevant." "It's relevant." She looked at the list she was making. "I'll have a full extraction plan by tomorrow." Harry looked at her for a moment. He thought about what he'd said on the floor of the first-floor bathroom in first year, "Plan me in from the beginning." He thought about the accuracy of the promise he'd made in response. "Good," he said. "I'll need it." Zeus arrived at midnight. Not through the elevator. Through the ceiling, literally, the stone of the hall's ceiling cracking along a single line and light flooding in and the cold clear specific presence of the King of the Gods descending into a space that was, structurally and fundamentally, not his. He was enormous. Not in the way Harry had imagined from the myths, not golden and sunlit and traditionally magnificent. He was enormous the way weather was enormous, the way standing at the edge of a thunderstorm was enormous, the presence of something that could unmake a city by accident and was exerting continuous control not to. He had Thalia's eyes, the same electric blue, the same quality of light that made you want to either move toward it or away from it, and he looked around the hall with the expression of someone arriving at a location they'd been told was neutral and finding it considerably less neutral than advertised. He looked at Harry. He looked at Hades, standing at the hall's edge. Something passed between the brothers that had the quality of a conversation that had been going on for 3,000 years and had no resolution in sight. "You called this meeting," Zeus said to Harry. His voice was not thunder, it was more precise than thunder, the specific directed version of it, the sound of lightning choosing exactly where to land. "You set the terms." "I set the location," Harry said. "The terms are straightforward. I'm here to account for my portfolio, as the Olympian notice requested. And I'm here to offer something in exchange for the Council's recognition." "What could you offer Olympus?" Zeus said. "Stability," Harry said. "Your conflict with Hades over domains has been the fundamental instability in the divine order since the lots were drawn. I am the convergence point. The place where shadow and lightning coexist without fighting. If Olympus recognizes my portfolio, you don't resolve the conflict is yours and older than I am. But you have a living demonstration that the domains aren't mutually exclusive. That has political and actual value." Zeus looked at him with those electric blue eyes. "You're a child," he said. "Not cruelly. As a fact." "Yes," Harry said. I'm also the only entity in either world that carries both your domain signatures simultaneously and has operated them at full integration for 4 years without a governance framework. That's a liability for Olympus if it remains unregistered. It's an asset if it's recognized. He held the electric gaze. You know this. You've known it since the sky accepted me. You're here because the formal challenge is better than the informal one, and the question of recognition has been waiting for someone to answer it directly. Zeus was quiet. From the hall's edge, Hades watched with those charcoal eyes, saying nothing. Thalia stood to Harry's left and the electrical field between her and Harry was doing the thing it always did when they were both at full presence, harmonizing, the two signatures finding a frequency that was neither of theirs alone but was more than the sum. Harry felt it and let it be present. Zeus looked at Thalia. Something in the electric blue eyes shifted, the thing that was complicated about being a parent who was more political than personal, looking at a child who had become something you hadn't planned and hadn't been asked to participate in. Thalia held his gaze with the straightforward complicated courage she'd always had with him, not aggressive, not appeasing, just entirely herself. Zeus looked back at Harry. The hall waited. What is your domain, formally? Zeus said. The question had the cadence of a formal recognition process, the procedure, the beginning of the record. Harry stood straight and felt his domains and spoke them clearly into the old stone of the hall, where it would be recorded the way these things were recorded in places that kept older books than any library, shadow and lightning. The in-between spaces, the crossing places, the boundaries between light and dark, between surface and depth, between the living and the dead. The storms that rise from the earth and break the sky. The silence between thunderclaps. The dark that holds the light's shape after the light is gone. He held Zeus's gaze. The domains that have always existed at the intersection of what you and Hades hold, operating in the space both of you have always needed a third presence for. The hall was very quiet. Zeus held his gaze for a long time. Then he looked at Hades. Something passed between them, not the 3,000-year argument, something older than that, something from before the argument started, the memory of when they were brothers before they were gods of competing domains and the world was still new enough that the future was entirely open. Hades looked at Zeus with those ancient eyes and said nothing. Zeus looked back at Harry. The council will convene, Zeus said. The convening takes 30 days from formal request. Your formal request was the message this morning. He paused. But I will tell you now what the recognition will be, because the Sky Domain accepted you 4 years ago and the recognition of the Council is a formality that confirms what already exists. He raised one hand. The lightning that came down through the crack in the hall's ceiling was not the hull-destroying blast Harry had braced for. It was precise, single, controlled, hitting the stone floor in front of Harry with the force of a formal declaration rather than an attack. Where it hit, the stone glowed briefly with a mark that was neither Hades's symbol nor Zeus's but something third, something new, a shape that was both a bolt and a shadow, the lightning bolt contained within its own absence of light. Harry looked at the mark in the stone. He looked at Zeus. Formally recognized, Zeus said, and the formality in it was both grudging and genuine, which was the most Harry had hoped for and was sufficient. Don't make me regret it. I won't, Harry said. He paused. Thank you. Zeus looked at him for one final moment and then looked at Thalia, really looked at her, not the political assessment, just the look, and said, quietly and without any of the formal weight, "You're well." Thalia looked at her father. "Yes," she said. Not warmly. But honestly. Zeus nodded once. He went back through the ceiling the way he'd come, the cracked ceiling behind him, and the hall returned to its deep underground silence. Nobody spoke for a moment. Ron said, very quietly, "That was Zeus." "Yes," Nico said. "The actual Zeus." "Yes." "Right," Ron said. He sat down on the floor of the Hall of Shadows. "I'm just going to sit here for a moment." Hermione sat beside him. She opened her notebook. She looked at the mark in the stone floor. She wrote something and then looked at Harry. "What happens now?" she said. Dumbledore arrived through the elevator at 12:30, alone, with his wand visible but not drawn. He came into the hall and stopped at the threshold and looked around at the space, at Hades at the edge, at the mark in the floor, at Harry standing in the center with both domains spread through the hall, at the quality of the dark, at Thalia and Nico and Hermione and Ron. He took it all in with those brilliant blue eyes and whatever diagnostic he'd been running since September, and Harry watched the diagnosis complete itself and watched the model in those eyes revise, not break, not collapse, but revise, the specific intelligent revision of someone who had been working with incomplete data and had now received the rest. He looked at Harry for a long time. "How long?" he said. "Since I was 7, Harry said. Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them the warmth was still there, genuine and complicated and carrying a weight that Harry now understood more fully than he had. "I put you with the Dursleys to protect you," he said. "I know," Harry said. "The Blood Ward. The sacrificial protection from my mother, extended through the family line. It was a real plan with a real logic." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "And Petunia Dursley locked me in a cupboard for 6 years and put a containment ward on the house." Dumbledore's face did something. Not a flinch, too controlled for a flinch. But something moved in it. "I didn't know about the ward," he said. "I believe you," Harry said. "That's not the point. The point is that the plan required you to not check. Required the situation to be managed from a distance. Required me to be small enough that the family arrangement was sustainable." He watched Dumbledore absorb this. "I understand why. A visibly powerful Harry Potter in Surrey draws attention. An ordinary orphan child doesn't." "You understand the reasoning," Dumbledore said. "I understand the reasoning," Harry said. "And I need you to understand that the reasoning required me to be a particular kind of thing, and that particular thing was the wrong kind. Not because it was unkind, you're not unkind, I've always known that. Because it was incomplete." Dumbledore looked at him steadily. "The prophecy," he said. "Tell me the full text," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment, and then he said it. The full prophecy, word for word, that he'd been holding since before Harry was born, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The hall held the words. Harry let them settle. He looked at the last line, "Either must die at the hand of the other," and understood what Dumbledore had been building toward, and understood what it meant now. "The power he knows not," Harry said. "I believed it was love," Dumbledore said. "Your mother's love, manifested through sacrifice, creating a protection that, it was," Harry said. "And also," he raised his hands and the shadow lightning rose with them, full and integrated, the column of combined domain that had silenced a field at Camp Half-Blood at age 11 and that now, in the deep hall with full power behind it, lit the darkness like a negative sun, like the reverse of light, like what light would be if it had always known the dark was half of it. Dumbledore looked at it. "Power he knows not," Harry said again, and lowered his hands, and the hall went dark and still. Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. "The prophecy says either must die at the hand of the other," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "I spoke to Voldemort tonight." Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. "He's not finished," Harry said. "He'll come back. But the terms of the final confrontation are mine to set, not his, and I don't intend them to include my death." He looked at the headmaster steadily. "I know you believe it might be necessary. I know your plan has built toward it. I'm asking you to trust that there's a path that doesn't require it, not because I'm unwilling to die for people I care about, but because my death is not actually what ends Tom Riddle. The Horcruxes end Tom Riddle. I can find every one of them. Hermione can help destroy them. And when they're gone, the prophecy resolves at Voldemort's end rather than mine, because I am the power he doesn't know, and I can face him with the full of what I am. The hall waited. Dumbledore looked at Harry with those blue eyes for a long time. He looked at the mark in the stone, Zeus's lightning, contained in its own shadow. He looked at Hades at the edge of the hall, ancient and still. He looked at Hermione, who was sitting on the floor with her notebook and a list of Horcrux locations that she'd apparently been compiling since she realized what was in the Chamber of Secrets, and who met Dumbledore's eyes with the polite implacability of someone who had done the research and was confident in the conclusions. He looked at Ron, who had gotten up from the floor and was standing with his wand out and his chin up, the complete uncalculated loyalty of someone who was here because Harry was here, and that was simply that. He looked at Nico and Thalia, steady on Harry's sides. He looked back at Harry. "Show me your plan," he said. Not as a request. As an acknowledgement. "Yes," Harry said. "That's why I called this meeting." What happened next was not a battle. It was something that looked, from the outside, like a conversation between a 12-year-old and a very old and very powerful man, conducted in the deep hall below the ministry with a god of the dead as witness and a mark of divine recognition fresh in the stone. From the inside it was something more complicated and more necessary, two people who had been working with different maps of the same territory finally sitting down and comparing them, finding where the maps matched and where they didn't and deciding, together, which version was correct. Dumbledore asked questions. Harry answered them, fully, completely, without managing the information anymore. He showed Dumbledore the shadow sense reading of the Horcrux locations. He let Dumbledore see the full domain integration. He explained the Olympian recognition and what it meant for the war and what it meant for the political structure of both worlds afterward. He let Dumbledore ask about Hades, and Nico, and Thalia, and he answered honestly, and he watched the blue eyes revise the model as each piece arrived and found the model becoming something more accurate and, ultimately, something more workable. Dumbledore listened to all of it. Then he said, "You could have come to me with this earlier." "You weren't ready to hear it earlier," Harry said, without accusation. "And I needed to know you well enough to know how to tell you." He looked at the old man. "I know you, now. I've spent a year watching you. You're not unkind. You're not wrong about wanting to protect people. You've been making the best plan you had the information to make." He paused. "Now you have better information." Dumbledore looked at him. "I don't need a sacrifice," Harry said. "I need an ally." In the deep hall below the Ministry of Magic, something that had been arranged in a particular way for 12 years quietly rearranged itself. Not dramatically. Not with light or sound. With the specific finality of a man who had been holding one plan for a very long time, deciding, carefully and with full understanding of the cost, to hold a different one. "Then you have one," Dumbledore said. The Hall of Shadows was quiet and old, and the mark in the stone floor glowed softly with Zeus's recognition, and Hades stood at the edge with his ancient eyes seeing exactly what he'd expected to see, and Harry stood in the center of it with both domains complete and steady around him, 12 years old and a god and entirely himself, and the war was not over, it would not be over for years, and it would be hard and real and cost things that couldn't be recovered, but the terms were his now. The terms were his. He looked at Hermione and Ron and Thalia and Nico, all of them present, all of them his in the way that mattered, the found family kind, the kind you built rather than inherited, the kind that was stronger for being chosen. He looked at Hades. He looked at Dumbledore. He felt the domains around him, shadow below and through everything, lightning patient and ready in his chest, the old Hecate magic threading between them like the roots of the oldest tree, and he thought, "This is what I am. This is exactly what I am." In the stone of the hall, below the mark Zeus had put there, something was writing itself in the old language of divine records, in the alphabet that the stone in the Underworld had first used to put his name on a wall 4 years ago. He didn't need to read it. He knew what it said. It said what he was and what he'd built and what the domains recognized and what the earth and sky had agreed on the night a boy in a cupboard felt the dark reach for him and reached back. It said the full title, All the names the old stone had been accumulating since September when it had first written Shadewalker. Stormborn. Claimant of the in-between. It said all of those things and then, finally, in the formal notation that the divine record used for things that were settled and complete and would not be revised, God of shadows and lightning. Recognized. He is not the weapon they made. He is what he made himself. Harry Potter pressed his hand flat to the stone floor of the Hall of Shadows, the way he'd pressed his hand flat to the black marble of the Underworld's antechamber at 7 years old, and felt the earth warm under his palm, and felt the sky answer from above through miles of rock and stone and city and night air, and he sat with both of those simultaneously, below and above, dark and bright, the junction that was his and no one else's, and he was 12 years old and he was ancient as the domains he carried and he was exactly, precisely, completely himself. Outside, over London, the night sky cracked open with a bar of lightning that the meteorologists would spend 3 days failing to explain, clean and black-edged and absolute, the shadow held in the center of the light, the lightning holding the shadow at its heart. It lasted 4 seconds. Then the sky went clear. The stars came out.